School Board workshop will come to order. Let it be noted for the record that Mr. Davis is absent. He is ill. The workshop today is to review and consider proposed revisions to School Board Policy Section 1.00 organization. We went through and as I understand it, we stopped at on your new latest and greatest handout. We have so many. If you will go to the, let's see, which page it is. 1, 2, the third page, regular and special board meetings and workshops. Wait a minute. At the fourth page, excuse me, rules of order, number 3. I believe that's where we're to start up.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Madam Chair,
yeah.
if I may, what I've done here, just in case you needed it, in these folders, you're going to have,
Will these pass now?
you can, yeah, there's one for everyone.
They already
This is if you
have
need
one.
it.
Well,
Use
they're
one.
just extras.
Oh,
Okay, on the right-hand
For the
side,
audience.
Yeah.
on the right-hand side, you have the clean version of everything that we've gone through.
Right.
Okay, right up through 1.02 E3, although we're going to revisit 3. And then on the left-hand side, you have the red line markup of everything we've done, 1.01, the entirety of 1.02, and the entirety of 1.03, all the way to the end, 1.13. So what you want to do now is you want to look at the 1.02 red line markup. And as the chair said, we left off at 1.02 E3, really, is where we kind of left off.
I just remember we reached a point where we just couldn't go further anymore.
Right.
Yep.
And we do need to be aware of the fair luncheon today at noon, so I guess we can work up till around 11:30 and get as much done as we can. I know y'all are all enjoying this.
Just can't get enough.
This is just.
Also, I have here,
Riveting.
if you all need it, this was my notes thing that I gave you some time back. And this really speaks to all of my revisions and, thoughts. Maybe we can plug this in, maybe we can take this away. I don't know if you need it. I figured I'd print out another set of copies.
Okay, let's start on rules of order, and what I've done is I've got the red line version and the new version. So now, and you put underlines and cross out on this version, right? No? Where's the version?
You're looking at the clean as revised.
Mm-hmm.
You
Okay,
want the red.
this
See?
is what you're doing, all right.
That's right.
And the only thing on this one that we had said that didn't make your clean or corrected version was, except where Robert's rule says otherwise, that motions that require 2/3 of a vote, not a simple majority. Just because not every vote requires a majority.
Right.
I didn't think we
We
agreed
didn't
on
add
that.
that. The only thing I have listed is we crossed off or school board policy on the third line.
Because I
didn't
remember
have
there
anything else
being
at that
debate
point.
over it, and originally
Right.
I agreed with what you said, but then Ms. Studdard made the argument, and I agreed with what you said, so
What did
then
I
I
say?
retracted it.
What did I say?
You had said that you didn't think we should put too much in there that would limit us.
Yeah.
And I agreed with what you, when you
Yeah.
made that argument. I think it's valid.
Okay, so what do you want to do?
Well, it
Take out-
does say, except when required by Florida statute,
Right.
State Board of Education rules
Yeah.
or school board policy, but Robert's rules probably needs to be included in there. I mean, it says we're gonna follow Robert's rules, but it probably needs to just be included because, again, a simple majority will carry all actions of the school board. And a simple majority doesn't carry all actions.
Well,
Because we know that there are some that will require a 2/3 vote, which is 4 of us, not 3 of us.
Well,
So-
I think we're getting too far in the weeds on this. We are guided by Robert's rules, but y'all know, if you've read through Robert's rules, we are not strict adherents to it, so I'm more comfortable with saying guided by, because the state law and the Board of Education rules, the statutes.
Well, that's all well and fine until it's your item that comes up that should have a 2/3 vote,
Isn't
and
that in
they're gonna
statute?
say,
Isn't that in statute?
it's in Robert's rules.
Well, we're guided by Robert's rules.
Yeah, but you're saying guided, loosey-goosey kind of guided, that we don't really follow it.
We
And so,
haven't. I
there
mean,
are
to
votes
the
that
T.
will require a 2/3 vote, which is 4 people.
Can you give me an example of one?
Betsy's item that went on
Right, but,
for rescinding a vote,
and at
that
what,
requires a 2/3 vote if you don't notice it at the meeting prior. Betsy noticed it the meeting prior, so it was a simple majority.
right,
But had it not been noticed that she was putting it on the agenda, the
right.
meeting prior, like I did last month, noticed that
So-
I'm putting it on this
Can
agenda.
I
Right.
ask a question on that? So in that vein, and I really truly am asking, what difference would it make to be in policy?
Well, if it comes up and somebody says, well, it only requires a 2/3, it only requires a majority vote, and I say, no, it requires 2/3 because you didn't announce it the month before, now we have a dispute over it, whereas if it's in our policy, we follow our policy.
But we say we're guided by Robert's rules. We have not had an instance where, as a board, as this board, which is what this policy, the next board can decide to do something different with this
Right.
policy. But as where we stand today, we don't have an instance where we haven't followed Robert's rules. And I can think of instances, or examples, to use your language. I can think of examples that we would not want to have that in policy, to
Such
be
as?
that. So the way we use, the way we allow people to speak at our meetings. Robert's rules, they come up to the microphone, they get to speak, and it's done differently than we have it in our policy. And so I could see if we put this more specific, I liked your language, Ms. Leonard, if we put it more specific in here, I think that members of the public can come back and say, you aren't following Robert's rules. I think I've gotten emails before with people that are angry that say, you guys didn't follow Robert's rules to a T. And so,
What does Robert's rules say about public comment?
I'm not aware
I'm
that it
not aware it's in
says
Robert's
anything
rules.
like
I'd
that.
like to know where it is in Robert's rules.
when it talks about, you know how at, so like at FSBA where they have people, the way that they have votes
Come up
on
to the
things,
mic.
and people have to come up to the microphone, and people can keep coming back up, and as long as there's open, and they set time limits on, items to speak on, but
To come
But
back
that's a
and speak a second
procedural
time,
rule
like during the
that-
2 meetings ago.
But I just think we have to be real careful what we put in our policy. We have, historically, Clay County School District, school boards have limited themselves far more in our policy. When I went to the FSBA policy workshop, we've limited ourselves a lot more than boards across the state. And I can see where it becomes like not to reiterate your words, but to be in the weeds.
We've all done, or at least I think we've all done the policy workshop for FSBA, and one of the things you come away with, it's not in your policy, it's just a good idea. How many times have they said that where we know that? If it's not in your policy, it's just a good idea. So I feel that this is something, and it comes up probably never, but when it does come up, if it's not in our policy, the majority of the board, whoever it may be at that time, may vote, well, we're just gonna go with a simple majority and not follow Robert's rules. That's why I feel that it should be in there.
But I want that option. I want to be able to say, no, I think we just need to stop that. I want that flexibility, and I think that's what I'm hearing you guys say too, so. Could we
Well,
make a decision and?
I don't know
I
that
can
it's-
count to
I don't know
four,
that it
majority
I
rules,
don't
but I
know.
don't agree with it.
Well, and I guess my other comment on this is that if, let's say we do have a situation where it wasn't brought up in the meeting before, it wasn't intended, something comes up on the agenda, and Mr. Dagetta pulls it and, talks to the chairman and says, this is one of those situations that Ms. Kerkus was talking about, that we should have a majority versus the simple majority, or the 2/3 votes, pardon me, versus the simple majority. We're going back to policy now. Policy states all school board meetings shall be guided by the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order. He points out, here it says, it should be, the 2/3 vote. At the time that the agenda item comes up, and even during the workshop, the prior workshop, that can be a point where this is, since it was
This
not
item's
brought
gonna
up,
require
this,
4
this
votes.
item is going to require 4 votes. I mean, that's the guided by. So we're covering it in that respect. It's not a, no, we don't ever wanna do that. I think that that's you've got an extremely valid point. There are going to be times where, I mean,
Have
Unfortunately,
we
we've never
ever
had to do
had
it.
this?
yes,
No.
exactly.
I don't ever
No.
remember this being an issue.
Right, so maybe just with the idea that it is guided by, and the true, I mean, you had indicated that at the beginning of Robert's Rules, it says, this is a guide. This is not law, this is a guide, but throughout that guide, we can then make those decisions that if it has to be a 2/3 vote, we can make it a 2/3 vote for that particular item.
I just can't imagine this ever coming up, but.
I mean, if it
But
does, though,
it
I
is a
mean, that's,
protection,
you
and I
made a
understand,
valid
I
point, there
understand
are
where Ms.
times
Carrick is
when,
coming from.
yeah,
But I do want to compliment this board. On this item, this was healthy, open discussion. This is
Mhm.
what we need to do. This is good.
Are
So,
we ready to move forward?
So we'll keep that as written.
and school board policy stays in it, correct? For some reason, mine was crossed off from last time,
Yeah,
so.
actions of the
And I
We
have
actually
but I
put
have
that
an
in.
asterisk, but I think we saved it, so,
so we
okay.
put school board
I
policy.
just wanted to be sure of that. Mhm.
Okay, are we ready to go to item 4?
I believe we are.
Well, amazing. We're on a roll. Okay.
Okay, so now we're speaking to the agenda in item 4.
All right, this is, we included in this. And this,
Okay.
Just use this one. Don't
yeah,
even
I
look
don't
at
even
that.
put it-
Yeah,
That's just.
yeah, this shows what he's
Okay.
striking and what we're adding.
Two consider establish the agenda for school board members.
Do you want me to read through it or aloud?
Yeah, just give us a chance.
Okay. So, agenda. The superintendent shall establish the agenda for school board meetings and workshops in collaboration with the board chair. School board members may add items to the agenda for board action, and no such item may be removed from the agenda without that board member's consent. Prior to each board meeting and workshop, and before publication of the corresponding agenda, the superintendent shall review the agenda and all backup materials with the board chair. The superintendent and each school board member may, with the approval of the school board, introduce an emergency item not previously included in a meeting agenda.
Okay, let me ask you something on this. And it may be covered further down. Where it says before the publication of the corresponding agenda, you mean publication to the public or publication to when she releases it? Like she'll be releasing this Friday?
Yeah, so
To the
publication,
staff. So are you talking about publication to the public? Because the staff, and we get it and the staff gets it on, like, take this week, this Friday.
Mhm.
But the public is not released to the public till
Right.
next Thursday.
Correct.
So which, do we need to clarify publication to whom? Or,
I don't think so. I think
I don't either.
that's okay to be a
It's-
little bit gray.
If the future board decides they don't want to do the agenda review workshop like we do, then they would probably review it on the 8th day before, like previously it was, whereas now you're reviewing it before it's released to us to see it. So we probably should just leave it more vague for that reason.
yeah, I think it'll come together for you too in
as we go further?
next sections.
Okay.
Because then you're starting to think about, well, how much notice?
And it says and the backup, and so many times,
Yeah.
It's
even,
not available.
even by the
yeah.
agenda review, we don't have the backup.
Right.
I'm thinking we may wanna take that out of policy or else staff needs to comply with
Enforce
policy.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
But look,
one
I
way or
think
the
we're
other.
gonna have to be a little bit stronger because it's getting to the point where a lot of times we're getting stuff kind of.
So,
You know what I think might be helpful to put in policy
What?
is that when changes are made to the information that's been given to us, we need a summary sheet
Yeah.
changes.
Karen.
Which is what
It's
Karen,
when Karen
been
says that that's
trying to
helpful.
do that.
Yeah, and
Because
that's.
I realize
you know,
once y'all have reviewed it,
Right.
Yeah.
you know,
Especially when it's like the allocation package. I mean,
yes,
that's
if you've already
ridiculous.
gone through, but you're being even, I'm telling you which items have changed, but I think she's being even more specific about what has changed in the item. And I try to ask people,
yeah.
but sometimes I worry about trying to relay to you what they did,
Right.
you know, it
So
kind of.
maybe it should be the person who submitted it
Right.
should send a summary
out
to
on
the
their
superintendent and the board with the changes. I
That would
actually
solve
came
a
down
lot
and
of
picked up a new allocation packet and asked them to put together a summary of
Especially
what
when
had
it's
changed.
2 days before the meeting, and so that's a
Mhm.
lot to go
Or
through.
at the meeting.
Or
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the meeting.
And I can
Oh,
think of
never at the
instances
meeting.
like personnel consent agenda, where it's this huge, 63-page document,
Yes.
and 2 things changed. I know there's been several instances where then in the meeting, I'll go, somebody will ask or comment, the public will comment, and I'll think, well, we
I
didn't
remember
talk
seeing
about
that.
that,
Right,
yeah.
right.
That wasn't in there exactly
Yeah,
that
and
way.
we didn't realize they even made a change to it.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to knock
No.
the hard work staff does,
Right.
Well,
but
and
It
they're
was-
working up to crunch time, and I get that, so
Mhm.
let's just work together, and that if you alter it, then just give
Just-
us
just
everything
highlight
what
the
you
alterations.
I mean, it's one
Different
email
changes,
to all the
yeah.
board
Right.
saying,
Yeah.
and
Well-
Karen and Addison,
Right.
or Mr. Davis, that this was changed, and if they wanna give a little rationale, if not, we have.
So-
But like Ms. Gilhousen said, 2 days before the meeting, things start getting, that's when we just start getting phone calls
Right.
and I don't remember seeing that.
And
And then
once-
you gotta go back and try to dig through.
Once the agenda is published, it's locked. It's locked to everybody. So in order for them to make a change, they have to go through me.
Okay.
So,
But
I
they're
mean,
supposed to have permission from the chairman.
and
And they don't always contact and say, we're making a change to the personal consent agenda. And they need permission before they change it.
and I
Usually
guess,
Karen will
is
call
that in
me.
the policy?
I try to,
Karen
No.
will call me and ask,
I'm not sure if that's in the
can I
policy.
add this, can I do that? And, and
pretty
most of
sure
the
it
time,
is.
it's just routine
Mhm.
paperwork kind
Is
of
that in the
stuff.
policy? I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in there that
What?
it says changes can only be made with the chairman's permission.
That should be in there.
And I
Yeah,
wanna
it's-
say that might also be a
It was here
statute
somewhere,
thing.
but I don't know if
Is
it's.
it in
and
statute?
you, sometimes
So,
they're just,
yeah,
somebody
we're-
found a
we're here.
typo in their
Yeah.
stuff. So I think we're talking about substantial changes.
Yeah,
I mean, if
absolutely.
they just wanna
If
fix
there's
a
a typo.
typo,
yeah.
But as far as the backup,
But even that, I would wanna know what the change was.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a simple change, you know what I mean?
Let me ask you, let me put this out there, because that was one of the things that I noted on my little notes here. When we're talking about broadly notice and agenda, should we clarify that backup material must be publicly posted no less than 2 days before the meeting, like an
No.
agenda? Currently, our policy specifies only delivery of backup material to each board member no less than 2 days from the meeting.
no.
Just to
That's
think
because
about.
once she
No,
sends
that's
that
not right.
agenda, she can't go back and change it 2 days before. Once it's out, she just said, it is,
well, it's
In
locked,
stone.
it's locked for all the authors. Now, I mean, I can, but it requires your permission.
What does it say in statute about, because it says the agenda will be published to the public 7 days prior to a meeting.
Right.
Does it include anything about the backup material?
No. So we do a lot more. We impose a lot more on ourselves. So really, when you're talking about statutes, you're talking about Chapter 120, and you're talking about some parts of the education code. Like I told you before, you look everywhere and it says, yeah, you should go seven days out, but the rule is no less than 48 hours. So you can put out an agenda, you can put out a notice all the way up to 48 hours before a meeting, be it regular or special. Do we want to do that? No. You should always shoot for 7. But the law, when you talk about the law, under the Education Code in 120, it sets out the 48-hour deadline. The notice is where we're going to meet, when we're going to meet, what we're going to talk about. You guys put, and I think that it's healthy to put more than not, the expectation of an agenda in addition to the notice. And the agenda is obviously much more detailed than a regular notice of a meeting. And then you also add the backup material. right now, the way that I read this, and let me just kind of read through the end of this and you'll kind of see where I'm coming from. So, we say, where I left off, prior to each board meeting and workshop and before publication of the corresponding agenda, superintendent shall review the agenda and all backup materials with the board chair. So what does that mean to me? There will be backup materials and agenda established 7 days, hopefully 7 days before the meeting, on a regular meeting.
To
You
Carol's
add
point,
and
she's,
workshop though, so.
she's
Well,
reviewing
and we
the
can
agenda,
take that off.
it's more like 10 days?
Well, I'm
Because
gonna
it's,
come down
it's the two, it's.
Thursday of
Before
this
it's
week.
Before it's
released.
Before it's
released to
released
us.
to the staff and
Right.
us.
Yes.
Right.
So
And
that's
then,
actually 14
Is it 14 days?
Yeah.
So our old format,
Yeah,
procedure
you're-
for doing it was 7 days because we didn't have these
But
agenda review meetings.
as we talked about at the last meeting, the
Right.
agenda review workshop kind of threw a monkey in our
Mhm.
schedule, so that's what we needed to think about,
Right.
of how we're gonna do this.
Well-
Because I do like having the agenda review workshop.
Oh,
I
gosh,
think
yes.
you
I think
can-
that's
I
very
that's
helpful.
very important. But then again, you know, in thinking through this, I thought, gosh, it's, you know, it could be that staff
We'll make it
it would have to come
staff.
2 weeks ahead and us 2 weeks, 2 weeks before the meeting, which means you've just got 2 weeks after a board meeting to get whatever you want in reality, staff is not gonna have their stuff ready.
So why
14
don't
I-
days
we,
ahead
why don't
of
we
time.
leave it so that it says, so that so it says the 7 days. So
Yeah,
that when
which is
it's
what we're doing.
published to the public, all backup material will be attached
Right.
at the 7-day mark. And then if we have our agenda review and they're not ready with it, superintendent can still explain, and we know that we're not getting it in 48 hours, that we're getting it 7 days with a week to go through.
So here's where I'll pick up, okay? Because I agree with all that, and you see, because
Right.
that's one of my markups. The agenda for a regular school board meeting shall be posted for the public 7 days prior to the meeting.
Mhm.
Any subsequent amendments of the regular meeting agenda must be posted for the public as soon as practicable, but not less than 48 hours prior to the meeting. That's law. The agenda for a special meeting or workshop shall be finalized and posted for the public as soon as practicable, but not less than 48 hours. See how I'm not putting 7-day, I'm not making it an expectation?
Mhm.
But when you come to workshops and special meetings, but I am imposing the duty that you lock it down 48 hours out prior to such special meeting or workshop. Now, implicit in this, the way that this is reading, is that at the time of publication to the public, right, you've got your agenda, you've got your notice, and you've got your backup material.
That's not implicit, because we had several instances that and it was new superintendent, but we brought it to his attention, but we had several instances where we didn't have backup material and it got slid in at the last minute,
Mhm. Yeah. Yes.
significant changes.
Yeah.
So, you look at this next section with respect to backup.
Before you go on though, I'm not sure I'm in agreement with what you've stricken as far as after the agenda's been posted. Changes shall be made only for good cause as determined by the person designated to preside, and the cause shall be stated for the record. You know, that falls under the chairman, that she's the only one who can make changes to the agenda. I'm not sure if that's good to remove it, or did you add it somewhere else?
No,
Okay.
Why would you
I
delete
kind of went
that?
on in my notes on this thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
why would you delete that?
Well, let me ask you this, and I'll leave it as a rhetorical question. What is good cause?
Health, safety, welfare of the district.
Health, safety, welfare is emergency. By law, there are statutes that say if it's health,
I could say, I'm trying to think back in the past when we have done this, it's not often, but it would be, maybe something came up and we've got to add 2 teachers yesterday.
right,
And field
and
teachers or
it did
something.
not make it on the agenda, but for the welfare of the district, the smooth working operation of the school district, I would, or whoever's chairman, would state in the record that this was added and the cause was blah, 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 blah.
No, because they do it anyway.
What?
It's done anyway. That LPN that we voted on at the last board meeting, the one at Orange Park Junior High School, that one was already working. That was what the health department lady was telling us. She had already been hired and was working by the district.
Well, see, we can't, that's,
See, and there's plenty of times that they do bring stuff,
Mhm.
especially on the
After the
personnel
fact.
consent agenda, you'll see, it was approved in September and it's coming in November.
now, how do we stop that?
We don't approve it. I don't know how
And
we
the
stop
Well,
person's
you-
been
how can you
working.
not-
I mean, you know,
how
That's
can you
the
not
welfare,
approve when
no, that's
someone's
the
already
health and
working?
welfare and the safety
Yeah.
of the
That's,
of the
that's
district.
that's a respect issue.
Right.
It's a lack of
So-
respect for the board. Now, I don't
No.
know how you,
Now, that's kind of gone on for
years,
years.
When
it's not
did-
this
Not just this
superintendent.
superintendent, it
And
was
it's
prior
not-
and prior and prior.
And I
That's,
know things come
I
That's
knew
in
it
the
up,
way.
goes back
but
for at least 4.
it does.
I know it
yeah.
used to drive me crazy back in, many years ago, that we would get travel, which they had known that was coming
Right,
6 months ahead, or behind
That's-
that.
yes.
And we would get it after they had already gone on the
Right.
trip. And I remember Mr. Scrooby, who was the school board attorney then, he would get really, his hair on his neck would stand up
Mhm.
when kids would be going out of state and we didn't even know about it, that they were going. And then come to find out that this had been in the works for 6 months. So,
Right.
you know, they got a little bit better about that, and then it starts, you know, over the years, it gets more lax again, but.
And it is risky
Right.
for exactly the
Insurance-
point you're saying. What if we
insurance-wise.
had, what if last time we had said, we're gonna make this an RN position, and they had already hired this LPN?
Right.
Yeah,
They truly didn't hire that, I don't know what the language is, I think there's some kind of language that they say, per approval by the board. Will that person not be paid? Are they not covered under?
well, they can't, somehow we've got to,
That'll be under
Relay.
HR policy, I would think.
yeah.
That specific instance, but,
Mhm.
you know, when we talk about good cause, when you're talking about what would be
Well,
good
what am I gonna
cause.
say? The good cause is because this person has already been employed for 2 weeks in our school district, and.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
They've
That's
been
awful.
employed for 2 weeks, they
You
didn't
can't
make it,
exactly do that.
they didn't make it to the last school board meeting for approval. And we have now bumped them back to 12 days, possibly 14 days for backup and everything to get things approved. Now granted, they could add it within 48 hours of that last school board
Right.
meeting, but if they didn't, or if they didn't have someone at that point, because they were still looking for an RN, which was my understanding, they were still
I
looking
think the
for an
application
RN
is
to
for an RN.
fit to fill that position.
But they
Legally
said
hired
they'd already
LPN.
hired an
And
LP.
then
And if, but
allocations
if they
for
had
an
been
RN.
working for 2 weeks prior to our
should
meeting,
pay more attention to that.
that's within a month, that's literally 2 weeks before that meeting.
But I
mean,
can
there's
think
no,
of a
there
good
was no
cause.
time for us to
Okay.
approve that anyway.
I wasn't on the board then, so I don't know exactly how it got added to the agenda, but, so I'm gonna do a hypothetical.
Okay,
Okay, so I can think of a good cause instance where the board chair would want to put something on the agenda. Now, I don't know that it would need to happen within 48 hours. I guess it could, most likely it would be brewing for longer than that. But the instance where the board asked the BCC to put the appointed versus elected superintendent on the ballot. So
okay.
the board wanted to vote on, and it wasn't a support or deny, it was just we're gonna let the voters decide.
Right.
Okay, and the superintendent didn't want it on the board agenda, didn't want the board to vote on it, as I recall. So my hypothetical, the superintendent would not want the board to vote on something, maybe the superintendent didn't support something,
Right.
and therefore didn't agree to put it on the agenda with the board
And I put
chair.
it on.
That's right.
And the board
Mhm.
chair
It was
put it
yeah,
on,
yeah.
that would be good cause.
Yeah.
You were doing it for good cause because the voters should have their voice.
And
I don't know, I guess.
So
I'm not-
I think-
it's the school board's agenda.
Yeah.
So the
True.
superintendent didn't have the authority to remove an item that the chairman had placed on
That was the thing, I
that
had placed it
agenda.
on and the
So
superintendent
you bring up
removed
a
it.
very
Or I
good
put it
point.
on, I forget who,
I
but
kinda
She
vaguely
brings
had
up a good point. In the front of this, it gives the, when you talk about implicit,
How far back are you going?
just in this one,
just
number
the
4.
beginning of number 4 down at
The
the bottom.
superintendent shall establish the agenda for school board meetings, I guess that's fine. But it just doesn't send it says in collaboration with the board chair. I guess it sends the message, it's just a passive sentence versus an active sentence.
Right,
And it gives the impression that it's the superintendent's agenda.
and it's not, it's,
Well,
you
the
know, that
next
we.
sentence says that school board members may add items.
Right.
And no item can be stricken without that board member's consent.
That would
So I
take
think
care
We
of
had
what
to
she was
add that
talking
in.
about.
Yeah,
That was added
Yeah.
after this
Right,
incident that
right.
Betsy just described, that's why that
Right.
was added.
hypothetically.
Because it
So I
happened
think-
several times with the superintendent removing board members' items.
So maybe if we
Yeah.
have all that covered, we don't need to have the
By
good
the time.
cause statement in
Right.
there.
That's what I think, and I think the scenarios we've been playing through are better addressed through our HR policy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you,
No, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. If you're talking about the chairman's authority,
No, she was meaning the other,
okay.
the LN,
The
RN.
LPN,
right,
yeah,
okay, okay, I'm
LPN.
sorry.
But I
Yeah,
was
sorry, I didn't
saying,
mean to
I
say
think
that,
it's
but yeah.
covered in that, I think it's repetitive. After the agenda has been posted, change may be made for good causes determined by person designated to preside. So here's why I think you may not want that in there. So let me play this scenario out for you. Sometimes saying less is better. Because what if it were an instance where we didn't get along as well as we do, so we didn't have the respect, and the chair got sick, God forbid, had a car accident on the way to the meeting, whatever, and the person who is presiding is not, say it was an instance where chair and vice chair aren't there, and there's 3 people,
we had that happen once already.
and the person presiding decides, oh, we're not gonna do these agenda items.
Mhm.
They could, by leaving that statement in, they could pull things off the agenda and not have them voted on. And I understand that that sometimes gets into dirty politics, but I could see why you may not want that in there.
And that exactly what you're describing happened when John McKenna was the chair and you were the vice chair, with an item that was on the agenda for our bargaining team. And I had pulled it because at the time I was talking about the salary, the supplement that they got. And it was removed. And it was not handled correctly. And so you're right, and that can very well happen.
Because that item didn't belong to a board member, then
It should not have
then
been
it gives,
removed.
then it gives the chair the
And what
opportunity to
the vice
strike
chair
it.
at the time said, well, the chairman, that was her item, and I'm acting chair, so I can remove it.
I didn't
have the-
remove it,
Yeah, Charlie, it was withdrawn.
but I didn't
So-
remove it.
That-
Please don't put,
But
please
that's
don't
what you
put,
said, if you go back and listen to what you said, you
please don't
said,
put on me
I'm
that I
the
did something
acting
that I
chair,
did not
so
do.
I can remove this, and
No,
that is
I
what you
didn't.
said.
I
And so
didn't.
that can happen and did happen, so, but I still think anytime the agenda is changed, it really should have the approval of whoever the chair is at the time, whether it be acting vice chair or the chairman. It should not just be done by the superintendent for the exact reason that
So-
we're stating, that,
The superintendent cannot add and remove
Well, then
things
why
to
don't you
the
just make
agenda.
a statement that says, any alterations must be approved by the chair? Just a
so we're
simple
already saying that, okay?
Yeah, we are.
Here's what we're doing, okay? And again, that's why I gave you guys my notes. So here's just, if I may. You've got to think of this. The superintendent is the secretary of the board. He's not a voting member, okay? He's responsible as the secretary of the board, vis-a-vis Karen, to put together the agenda, okay? Our rules say, as written right now, that the agenda is developed in collaboration with the board chair, okay? What we're talking about here is post-publication changes to the agenda, okay? And I've tried to put in very clearly that there will be no changes less than 48 hours out from the meeting unless you have an emergency item, and I define the emergency item in this paragraph below. That's it. So read as a whole, it is the board chair working with the superintendent as the secretary of the board to develop an agenda. Board members, we've already said, can add things to the agenda. But I'm saying you don't get to add things less than 48 hours out, unless you have an emergency.
I
And
don't
we're saying
understand why
7
that
days,
sentence
so we're not
has
in
been
agreement.
struck. I don't-
I think the issue, I think the sticking point for
It's
what
the
he
7
said is
days.
good cause.
48 is an
Because how do you
emergency.
determine good
only.
cause? I think what, just a simple statement that says alterations made up to 48 hours prior to the meeting must have the approval of the school board chair. I mean, something, you don't have to include the
Okay.
clause of good cause. If if the school board chair has
No
that
changes.
ability, then it doesn't matter what the cause is.
She's right, no changes should be made once it's posted to the public without the school board
Chair's approval.
chair's approval, regardless of who the chair is.
Somehow we need to take that sentence
Okay,
in and
so what
just
we
say,
can
after
do-
the agenda's been posted, changes may be made only as determined, or.
Only
By
with
the
the-
school
with
board
the
chair?
approval-
Only with the
only
approval,
of
only
the
with the
board
approval
chairman.
of the person
I like that.
designated to preside, or however
Okay,
you want to say.
after the agenda has been posted,
That suit everybody?
changes may be made only upon approval.
You could just leave that sentence as it is. I mean, if you're saying the same thing, just using a different word for approval.
Well, they're talking about trying to take good cause out of there. I wouldn't necessarily have to have good cause.
And then the cause shall be stated in the like that
That
really.
is, all that language is borrowed from chapter 120, which has a uniform set of rules that don't apply to you.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
They apply to state agencies.
Okay, so go back and read that sentence now as you.
So we're saying, here's what we're saying in total.
Okay.
7 days, then you post, okay? No less, no set of circumstances, no less than 48 hours you post, okay? Any changes made to post-publication agenda, notice, whether it's 7 days,
Shall be made only, or
Right.
shall be made what, upon?
only upon approval of the board chair. I like that.
And then I feel like it would be fitting to put in that paragraph a clause about a summary of changes made will be provided to the public and the board.
That might
I'm
be
not
getting
sure
too
that-
deep in
I'm
the
not sure
weeds.
that needs to be here. It
You
needs
don't
to
think
be
so? I think
somewhere.
that's just more of a
I
policy,
think
or
that-
a
Procedure.
procedure.
Yeah. Yeah.
We already have in here, just so you
And I'm
know,
not sure I would put, you said upon approval of board chairman, I think you would be safer to put person designated to preside. That would cover,
oh, I like that,
you
yeah.
know, if the chairman's not there, you know, there's, let's leave, let's,
You could just put the acting chair, it's whoever's.
Yeah, designated to preside sounds,
or person designated to preside. I mean, that sounds legal.
The board member. The board member designated to preside.
Yeah, okay, good. You got it, Mr.
I
Dagada?
think I do, ma'am.
Okay, let's go to the next paragraph.
Okay,
then.
so then I say, no action shall be taken by the school board on any matter unless it is shown as an item on the corresponding meeting agenda, or an amendment thereto, and the backup material adequate for an informed decision is delivered to school board members at least 48 hours prior to the meeting at which the action is to be taken.
Now that's where you were talking about, we get into a time crunch on those 48 hours.
So then I say with the time crunch, this provision shall not apply to matters which the school board determines by a separate vote. The board determines by a separate vote to constitute an emergency item. For purposes of this policy, an emergency item exists when public health, safety, or welfare is endangered and requires immediate action of the school board.
Are you saying we have to vote on something that we declare as an
Yeah.
emergency item? Because I think before the chair determined it was an emergency item, but the voting's fine.
Yeah, you really do. The law
Okay.
does impose
Yeah,
on the
keep-
collegial body.
Keep us
And
legal.
you just do it at the start of the meeting?
Yes,
That you wanna
yes.
add the item
Yeah.
to?
Yes, you do, and you have to vote.
Right.
The
Okay.
board at the meeting says, oh, we've added within the 48-hour window this item, here's why. Can I make a motion?
Mhm.
Second?
And then when do you state the reason for the emergencies before you take a vote?
Yes, you wanna explain that.
That'll be fine.
and
So
is
that-
this
that
statute
covers
you're
it.
quoting, or is this just our policy you're quoting? That's crossed out. What
This-
was that?
Just
What?
define by
Defined by
paragraph.
paragraph 1.02F.
Yeah, because our numbers changed, and I remember, I'm trying to
Right.
summarize things and not repeat things. So I took the definition of an emergency from what used to be there, 1.02, whatever,
Okay.
and I just put the language in there. And that language is actually borrowed from the education code. So,
So we wouldn't
I'm
have it in an
still-
emergency item that doesn't, well, I guess, like the instance of need a nurse yesterday, 2 days ago. I guess we'd call that the health, safety, and welfare of the district.
Well, was she hired for this school year? Or was
She's
she
there,
hired?
She's working.
So then that allocation was already approved.
It was approved as an
It was
RN.
As an
As an
RN, they
RN
had to change it from RN to LPN.
Because they couldn't find an
RN.
RN.
No,
But they could.
they didn't change the allocation.
Yeah,
Did-
it's still
Yeah,
an
because
RN.
Did it come to us as a change?
It came to us as a change on the personnel
Proposed.
consent agenda.
I thought it came to us
And they
as a
said,
change.
They
You
said
know,
they couldn't hire an RN,
they
so
said
they
they
had
tried
to
to
get an
find one,
LPN.
so they went ahead and hired an LPN.
That's right.
Because they needed a body
What
in that
I'm
position.
saying is that we were asked to vote on it, what we didn't realize, that the health department lady was trying to tell us in her 10-minute presentation, was that this person was already working.
Mhm.
So whatever we decided was a moot point. I mean, there was an allocation. Nobody was working illegally, there was an allocation and somebody was
Right.
working under it.
The
And
problem was the terminology that we were using. for
Yeah.
allocation.
Did it come
I
as-
honestly think it needs to be changed from school RN to just school nurse.
Mhm.
There's no requirement in state statute that we have an RN. So to me, it just covers us legally if you designate it as school nurse and then it's, I mean, ideally you want an RN, but in an instance like this,
Did it come as a proposed allocation change from an RN to an LPN?
yes, that's what it was.
It did.
That was what was on
I
it.
don't remember.
It was
that.
the
Proposed
only thing on
allocation
it.
I
changes?
just remember on the allocation package, it was an LPN when we voted.
That would be for next year, yeah.
No, it was a separate item. It was a separate
No,
item.
it was a separate
one-
item.
And it was the
I
only
really
thing on
think
that.
that this is something
I'll
that,
go back and look.
But this goes back to why we should have a summary sheet.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I guess the next question, if we're not gonna put it in policy, would you guys want to have like a memo sent out that at the board workshop today, we discussed the need for summary sheets and just as a courtesy to the board, if you as a department head have a change made to an item you have on the agenda, please notify the board and provide a summary sheet.
Do we want just the chairman to send it to the superintendent on behalf of all of us?
I think that would be good, since we all agree that we want that, I think it needs to be,
so a summary of post-publication changes,
Mhm.
that's what you're talking about.
and Mr. Daggett, will you get
But
with Karen
that
and give her
wasn't supposed to
the
be
language?
changed.
and
That
send it
wasn't.
to
No,
Mr.
it was
Daggett?
brought up in the workshop.
Send it to
Yeah.
Mrs.
He
Simmons.
told
so
us
that
in
we
the
know
workshop
it's here.
that they weren't
Right.
able to
She'll let
find
you
to
review
hire
it
an
first.
To
RN.
actually
Right.
So that's
do
why
the
it was
work,
removed.
I mean, I can punt it back to them and say, you can only make this if you've gotta send an explanation.
Did y'all hear what Ms. Bush
I
just
thought he had
said?
told us that.
Listen to what Ms. Bush just said, because this is another wrinkle.
Well, I'm just saying, once it's published, all the authors, anyone who has the ability to go in and actually make a change, they have to go through me. So, I
Once
mean,
it's posted.
I can just kind of be the gatekeeper that
Right.
if you're gonna make a change, you have to notify the
Yeah.
board and explain to them what your change
that'd
is.
be great.
But, wait, and I'm not trying to be nitpicky and it sounds like I'm not trustworthy. It's just so often I think of these large documents that we'll get that are changed. What we don't need is just updated the personnel consent agenda. And
You want
then,
page numbers and
Yes.
We
specifics.
want a detailed summary of
Right.
the exact changes that have taken.
because that's what we get now is, we updated personnel consent agenda. And there's
Yeah,
been times
good
when I
luck.
think, okay, first of all, I don't have the printer, well, at home, that's a lot of
Put it
printer.
in your car.
Page by page
And you know, time to
comparison.
pull it out,
Yeah,
look, because you're
and you're
driving
trying to
here.
figure out, okay, what's
Yeah.
the nuance difference, what's
Yeah.
the red line difference, and they have done a much, I will give them, Mr. Davis credit, that his staff has done a much better job of that summary
Yes,
in the
for sure.
agenda,
Yes.
really telling us, and I appreciate
Well,
So
that.
much more detailed than it
You know,
ever had
if we,
been.
if we know about it in advance, we might have time to call and ask the person, but it would
Right.
certainly save a lot of phone calls taking up their time if either we ask the individual to get it to the board or give it to Karen and
To
have her send it out
disseminate.
to the board. I think that would probably be cleaner, because she's, as the gatekeeper, as she called herself, when they say we need to make a change to this, and then she will say to them, you know, the board wants
You first need
the
to
item, the
call you, I
rationale, the
guess.
blah, 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 and
Or
then,
she could even say the chair won't approve it without a summary sheet.
okay,
Yeah.
got
Because
you.
you have to approve
Big
it.
bad
And
chair.
and next Tuesday, when we do the agenda review, would be a good time to
So
say
tell
it
everyone.
verbally
In
in
front
front
of
of
everyone
all
here.
of cabinet,
Yeah, that's
what
a
you
good point.
expect, yeah.
Okay,
That's a good
okay.
point.
Don't let me forget.
Oh, we won't.
Because we're voting on a lot of allocation packages over the
Yes.
next. and
Yes.
there's
You're gonna have some
big-
big documents coming
Right,
up on
yes.
this
So
next
it's
agenda.
And when they change one item, we don't need the entire document.
I mean, 3 days
We just need
before.
the one item.
You just, I mean, we have, life happens and you're busy and the afternoon of the board meeting, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't get to go through,
Well, even
those
if you
90
do go
pages.
through it,
And
if
then
it's a small change, you might
If
miss
it's
it.
a small
If
change.
it's not highlighted.
Well, that's like last month with the allocation packet. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure everyone
They
would spend
should've-
days going through and looking, and then 2 days before, or the day before, which
Right.
I drove down because, and I said, I want a summary because I don't wanna have to compare
Right.
all
Mhm.
41
So what
schools.
Mr. Daggett is putting in the policy now, and what he's saying, and I think it's a good practice, but we're going to have to coach staff, you're right, the enforcing, but coach them to, you
Coach, that's a
can't,
good one.
you can't have at our seat on the dais
Right,
an
Sit down and
updated
there's
package.
something right
It's
there,
really-
and
It
you're
has to be
thinking,
done 48
oh.
hours ahead.
right, and a summary, I
Well,
like that. So
in
that we
order
just
for
know
us to
what
do
two
our
things to look
job
at.
correctly,
Yeah.
it will be a help to us, and I think, they'll get used to the procedure, just like we've gotten used to the, of other things, agenda review and things like that. It just, we've got to work together.
Let me ask you
And,
this, because I'm not in those various emails from the
Right.
superintendent or his generals, I call them his generals, to the board. Do you receive with some regularity, agenda changes or item
From Karen we
changes?
do. From Karen we do.
I'm
From
talking
here.
beyond the 7-day?
You mean?
Like within the
before-
7-day
within the
window,
7
you're
Yes.
not regularly receiving?
Yes, we are.
Every agenda, almost
Something
without
has
fail,
changed.
something has changed.
Mhm.
Now, it
Please
may
tell
not,
me no to this question.
We may
You're
not
not
always get
regularly
notified of it, though.
receiving any within the 48-hour period.
Yes, we are.
yes.
Okay, that can't happen.
Well,
So,
that needs to be clarified to
yeah,
staff.
we need to coach.
Is it a
Well, and
change
it comes
or
down
is
to the
it,
chair.
is
I mean,
it,
if the chair just enforces.
An addition,
that's just, is it an addition within that 48 hours or is it a tweak on what we've already had in the workshop?
Sometimes
Because
it's
we
a-
get tweaks
Well,
within the
our
48
policy
hours.
says that you
For
can't do
instance,
that.
would be an HR item, confidential item, that has been settled,
Yes,
like right now, and they've got the item on the agenda, but, the recommendation was whatever, and
We're able to-
something was
yeah.
finalized, and then we were able to
and it
go
could
ahead
be
and
now
act
it's a
on it.
resignation and it's added to the personal consent agenda. It could-
I mean, I'm trying to think of just,
But those aren't tweaks. I think you get into dangerous territory
Don't
when
say
you start,
tweak.
the law says 48 hours, the law doesn't say you can correct a typo.
Yeah.
I mean, a tweak is,
The law
there's
says
no
that you have to
definition of
put
tweak
notice
in the
out.
law.
I wouldn't even say tweak, but that would be substantial, but the thing is in that instance, what we had before us to vote on
mhm,
is not valid.
mhm.
We
If
couldn't,
I were you as the chair, since it comes to you to make the decision, and you're the one making the call, are we gonna
sometimes
do
you
it or
just have to
not?
make a judgment call that,
But I
you
would
know,
run it by,
Yeah, I would like to be part of that feedback.
well, I usually, if it's some kind of legal something, I'm on the,
But here's what I think. I think if I were chair, I would be very hesitant, not to criticize our past practice, we're moving forward, so not to say we maybe haven't done things in the past that we shouldn't have done. I think moving forward, now that I know what I know today, that's a better way to
now
put
that I
it.
know what I know.
Now that I know what I know today, if
Yeah.
I were chair, I would be very hesitant to have us vote on something we have received within 48 hours of that meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Regardless of the time crunch, because I think there's been a good fair amount that I can recall of times with this superintendent and the last that I share, I served with two superintendents, I can think of multiple times, so it's not
you need to.
designated to one, but I can think of multiple times where we've said, well, we really have to have this approved. We really would like to have more time, but this really has to be approved because of,
There's a deadline
Yeah.
next Monday.
And there's been times that you can look around the dais and everybody kind of looks uncomfortable, like really we shouldn't have. And if one person's uncomfortable, there's been times we've voiced that. I think you did at the last meeting or January meeting. You said, I'm not comfortable with this, but the rest of us were, we went ahead. Okay, that's a little bit different, but when everybody's kind of going, oh, this kind of feels,
And
This
those are
doesn't-
probably more things that you're trying to meet the requirements of the union contract. You know, sometimes like with reappointments.
but they've just got to get it in beforehand. I think
Yeah.
now out
I
of
think
the
we kinda
abundance
have
of
to
caution
urge
with the
them,
law.
and we
Yeah.
don't want things within 48 hours, but once in a while, like you're talking about, something will come up. And whoever is chairman needs to be able to do it, but
You know,
It's one of those
I'm
things
gonna
you
tell
really
you,
don't
where
wanna
I
happen.
see that you're getting into something at a board meeting,
Yeah.
workshop, whatever, well, at a board meeting, where you're gonna take action on something that I feel has not been adequately
Vetted.
noticed, I'm
Vetted
gonna tell you
properly.
that, and I'm gonna encourage you to dismiss the
Yeah.
But it
agenda.
sounds like you're not aware of when we're
No, I'm
noticed
not.
or not.
Right.
So how
No.
would you be able to make?
I'm
that
very
call?
uncomfortable with the
Yeah.
concept that with some regularity, there are changes made 48 hours.
let's just
So-
say. it's
The
made by
agenda is
line.
not changed.
It's
An
the
item.
attachment.
The back
Item.
Yeah.
Okay,
Which,
so,
I guess the backup, you said,
But the
is not
backup is what
part
we're voting
statute.
on.
it isn't,
It's not,
you're
so
adding.
we're not,
So that's.
we're not in violation of anything if
That's
we're
right.
changing backup.
Right.
Because the agenda has not changed at all, so we're not
That's right,
doing
remember,
anything wrong
that's
as
right.
far as legally, but we're certainly not comfortable with
Right.
it.
I think
Yeah, I
a
hear you.
strong message should be that really, we don't want something within 48 hours. I mean, it.
Addison's very, very good with
I mean,
this,
they're good
I
about
wanna
it.
talk
We
with
very
him.
seldom-
and
Well, they
get
do
something
change the
done.
backup with regularity. It's
Yeah.
or added to, and I'm not saying that to criticize Mr. Davis at
It's a
all.
respect thing, like you said.
There are times when I can think of instances where, I've been called down on the board floor for asking a question or for calling, and the superintendent himself called me down for calling him an hour before a board meeting, but it was because I became aware of something at that time. And so that's when you have the time to call and,
Right.
when you're going back through, because see, all of this circles back to if we have it before 48, if we
Right.
have it the 48 hours, then you're supposed to have adequate time that you could have called and had those
Right.
questions answered, and not, in my instance, called an hour before the meeting.
Right.
When I'm still trying to go back through and seeing what changes were
We've got
made.
so many things going on in our mind.
Well, we're saying in our policy, no action shall be taken
Well,
by
that
the
would- that
board
would- that-
unless-
That would stop it.
Are most of the
unless it is shown on the corresponding meeting agenda
But if
or
we get
amendment,
into-
and the
Think
backup
of the
is provided
situation
to you.
Ms. Bush talked about
So
though.
that needs
If
to
it's
be.
something to do with the
Follow.
contract
Well, it
and
needs to be
something
sent
came up
to
at the
our-
last minute,
got
I
you.
mean,
Cabinet.
We're also
I
looking,
agree in saying nothing 48 hours out, but we gotta have a little bit of wiggle room in there.
Which you do.
can I ask a
What you
question? Are most of the changes in that 48 hours that we're talking about, have they been personnel changes that you recall?
Some of them.
And in some of those personnel changes, we're talking, they have found someone for a position, whether it's a bus driver or a teacher or somebody resigned or whatever.
But
If-
their common practice is they put them on the payroll. That's not gonna be an instance.
That comes to us after the fact.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll see it.
that would not
But if
be
they
a,
come within that 48 hours, that is a change to the backup. So that's not necessarily a change that you're referring
Right,
to.
it's not,
Is
is
that
that
correct?
That's
What's on
right,
the
that's not a
forefront of our
substantive
minds
change.
is we're in
Because that's almost the
allocation
changes
season.
Yeah, well,
It's
that's
Last
true.
not,
year.
wait, let's let one talk at
sorry.
a time and then we can understand, okay?
I think what's on the forefront of our minds is that we're in allocation season, and last year, we had a lot of changes made over a
Right.
period of a week to
Right.
the allocation package. And it kind of happened a little bit this time around too. With this last one that we voted on, we're expecting more. So that's why I think that's where my hesitancy is, because if it's less than 48 hours, then how is that adequate time for you to get your homework done on that? Because it's not just a matter of reading it, it's a matter of thinking it through, asking questions of people that have valid information to offer on
Right.
that.
to what?
particular point. So I think, while I understand the HR portion of it, I think that's not really what we're talking about. with
I
this.
like the 7-day. I really like the 7-day and then only changes made with permission from the chairman. And I think the backup should be there 7 days
But I think
for all of us.
in order to be fair to the cabinet, when we notify them that we really want a summary sheet with the changes, we also need to notify them that it's in policy, that 48 hours is the
That's it,
cutoff.
that's the
Yeah.
cutoff,
And
for everyone,
That
No
needs,
changes.
For
just a
everyone.
gentle reminder.
including the board members.
Right.
And that's not a change we're making to policy, that's been in policy.
That's just
We're just
enforcing.
enforcing policy.
And look, the 7-day thing, I'm a big fan of that.
Should be
Look, the
7
more notice, the better. But what you're doing, you don't wanna paint yourself into a corner in the policy.
That's the only thing I'm.
So what you're doing is, you're setting the expectation of 7 days. And in no circumstance at all, other than an emergency as defined herein, do you make post-publication changes within 48 hours. You just don't.
I'm comfortable with that.
So, and I'm gonna tell you, I've sat here with Addison where he just takes things out, you know, because things aren't timely.
So
So
on
I'll
that
work
note,
with him.
Karen, when you notify us that a change is being made to the agenda, will you copy Mr. Dagada on that as well? So that-
You do copy me.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
then you're,
when
you're
she
seeing
sends
it
So
then.
that gets in.
No, I see the back end of it.
Good,
What,
good
I
for
see
this.
what Karen sends.
Well, that's what we see.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what we see too.
Go through this and show me where does it say, and maybe I'm just missing it,
Right.
that the backup should be submitted no less than 7 days.
This doesn't specifically say that.
It's
It
saying
says
48
in
hours,
no,
which
in
gives the
no
impression
instance.
that they can submit it up to 48 hours.
Right.
It's very loose if you say 48 hours. Nobody's gonna follow the 7 days because our policy says, well, no less than 48 hours. I have till 48 hours on everything. We could end up getting all the backup.
Right, so what if what if Mr. Dagada changes in the paragraph that starts with the agenda?
What?
Okay, so on page, well, they're not numbered, but the page that has page 5 quorum at the bottom.
Right.
Okay, so the paragraph, in the third paragraph down, where it
Mhm.
starts with the agenda, what if he changes that to say, the sentence that starts with, "The agenda for a special meeting or workshop shall be finalized and posted for the public as soon as practicable, but not less than 48 hours prior to such special meeting or workshop." What if he changes the agenda language? So anyway, to say, "The agenda for the regular school board meetings shall be posted for the public 7 days in advance of or prior to the meeting." Okay, what if he changes that to say the agenda and backup?
There you go.
Well,
Yeah.
look at the paragraph before. It says in that first sentence, prior to each board meeting workshop, before the publication of the corresponding agenda, the superintendent shall review the agenda and all backup materials.
But that's just what the board chair.
Yeah, but that's telling them, you gotta have your backup materials there then.
Yeah.
You see-
Yeah,
you
But it's saying for the board chair, but at no point does it say when they have to be sent to us.
No, but I'm saying, when,
It's
I'm
part of the
looking at
agenda
when
at
they
that
have to
point.
have the
Yeah,
backup.
you're right,
Right.
you're right.
Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
way,
Yeah,
if you look
you're
at
right.
that paragraph.
So we really don't
Okay,
need
so
to.
I wouldn't do
it's
that.
there.
It's there.
Okay.
Look,
It
remember,
says- it
the
says-
And we
law-
don't wanna post backup materials.
That's right.
Right.
You don't
I
wanna
mean-
force yourself,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
Remember, the law requires you to provide notice, okay? You add on top of it a detailed agenda and the expectation of backup, no less than 48 hours out.
yeah.
But as it is right now, the way that first paragraph,
Mhm.
the agenda shall, the superintendent, shall review the agenda and all backup materials with the board chair. That's gonna mean, folks, what we were talking about before, the 2 weeks, because if you, at that point, that is Thursday, 2 weeks before the board meeting.
Mhm.
So that means that they would have to have all
I think it's-
backup in 2 weeks. So that means what we were talking about, what I was talking about earlier, 2 weeks after the board meeting, they've got to have all the backup materials.
Maybe,
So
Well, then
that,
do you wanna
you see
take
what
it out
I'm
of there
saying,
and
and I
put it
think
back?
that's really cut.
maybe we should go
But-
back to the publication part and in there say that the agenda will be posted 7 days prior and put agenda and all backup material?
Well, that's what was just
Is
recommended.
that
The only thing
7
that,
days prior?
the only thing I was thinking on what you're just saying there they're pretty good about it. But occasionally, like I can think of an example recently. We got to the agenda review and they, on the Montessori, changing swimming pin,
Right.
or having that parent choice of Montessori at Swimming Pin Creek, they said backup is coming at our agenda review. And then we got the backup.
Right.
I don't remember if we got the backup within the 7 days or just within the 48
That I
hours.
don't remember.
She handed something to us as we were leaving
At the agenda review.
at the agenda
Right.
review.
So, but that was different. They said backup was coming or something. I remember there being a time where they, you know, they don't have it ready
Yeah,
and we get it later.
yeah.
It would be nice if we
Oh,
had
that
the
was the
backup at our
allocations.
agenda review meeting. But,
We're kind
but
of,
I can't tell you, I mean, and Ms. Bush will tell you, when I go and review the agenda, most of the time there's not much backup there.
So why don't we take
It's just
that out of
basically a
that?
placeholder for items, and I can look and kind of see what's coming up, but there's a lot of things that don't have backup at the time I review the agenda.
So why don't we
So I wait
strike
for the
that?
agenda review and we get a little bit more, but then at the agenda review, they usually have the backup
usually
there.
do.
Anderson
Most of it
goes,
is.
he
Yeah.
goes
Because it's
through
in
it.
his,
Yeah.
yeah,
We
it's in his
have it.
folder that he
It
goes
just
through.
often
Changes.
changes.
That's the thing.
Well, and then the changes are gonna be covered by the gatekeeper
Which the
over
changes
here.
are fine as long
And
as we
this
have a
policy
summary of
Yeah.
was
them.
Right.
written before we were doing the agenda
Yeah,
review.
we weren't doing
Right.
So
agenda
when
review,
this
so-
policy was written, you were coming in
The
like
day before.
eight days
And
before.
I was coming in 8 days before the board meeting, now I'm coming in 2 weeks
Yeah.
before,
So
so,
what if we
that's-
strike where it says, the superintendent shall review the agenda, where it says and all backup materials, you could strike that from that first paragraph and move it to the agenda for a regular school board meeting and the backup shall be posted for the public 7 days prior to.
so when I review it, they wouldn't necessarily have to have their backup
Well, if they
materials in
don't
2
anyway,
weeks
then
ahead
you're
of time.
violating policy.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's a good idea. What do you think, Mr. Davis?
I didn't quite follow that.
Okay.
So
Where-
You're-
in the-
All right,
Here we
let's
are.
go
Let's
back and
go
through it
back
one
to
more
the-
time.
number 4, that's what you're talking about,
Right.
move language
The
here.
second paragraph from the top, prior,
Oh,
where
no,
it starts
we're on
prior
this
to
one.
each board meeting.
Prior to each board meeting, yep.
Okay, so if you read down where it says, the superintendent, the second line, the superintendent shall review the agenda and all backup materials. What if you just strike and all backup materials from that? Move that clause down to the next paragraph where it says, the agenda for a regular school board meeting and the backup shall be posted for the public 7 days
Yeah.
prior to the meeting.
You could even then
I'm gonna
add,
ask you to repeat that,
I can do
okay?
it.
Because you're talking about, I was looking at the second sentence, it's not the second sentence. So prior to each board meeting and workshop and before publication of the corresponding agenda,
Mhm. The superintendent shall review the agenda and then strike and all backup materials.
okay?
All backup material's gonna be moved.
But then in the next paragraph,
And
go
then the
ahead.
next paragraph down, the agenda for a regular school board meeting and the backup shall be posted for the public.
Yeah, and all backup materials.
And all
Word
backup
it that way.
materials, yeah.
Just cut and paste.
And that way, if he has the backup to go over with you, that's a bonus, and it's not a requirement when you meet with him, Carol.
I got you.
Well, maybe, let's see, look at this, now let's get back into grammar here. The agenda for a regular school board meeting, and then you said, and all backup materials shall be posted. Wouldn't you say the agenda and all backup materials, that's what you're talking about? The agenda and all backup materials for a regular school board meeting, you know,
Yeah.
put it,
Wherever
I'm
you
trying to
want
get
it.
my
No, you're right.
subjects and the.
Your sentence structure is correct.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, because, I mean, I know it says the same thing, but
Yeah.
we're talking about the agenda for board meetings and all backup materials, so let's just say the agenda and backup for all board meetings.
Yep.
Okay.
And are you leaving the word all backup? Because then if for some reason something's not there, you're violating your policy.
I don't think you're violating it because of the next sentence. Any subsequent amendments of the regular meeting agenda must be posted for the public and as soon as practicable, but not less than 48 hours prior to the meeting. So then that allows you to, it's an amendment. It's an amendment to the backup. That allows the chair to have the flexibility of, say for instance, there's a time when, staff says, we're just not gonna have this ready, we pulled it, she has the ability to do that, so she can do the agenda item, or the amendment could be an actual item, or it could be a backup. I think that leaving that word as subsequent amendments is a much broader,
And I'm gonna
gives the
add,
chair more authority to
Are
make
you-
those changes.
Are you with
yeah,
us, Mr. Davis?
I'm with you, but what I'd like to do, if
Okay.
you all agree, is keep, in that paragraph prior to each board meeting and workshop, I want to keep in the policy, I think it's wise to keep in the policy the expectation that the superintendent will review the agenda and backup material with the board chair.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
So
So
just
maybe
leave
just,
it
so
and
just add it down there also.
Just
include
add it.
backup
We'll just add it.
materials, but get rid of the all maybe.
Yeah, and backup
And
materials.
that covers the chair that she
Well, that
expects
does-
the backup
that
material to
kinda
be
gives them an
available to
expect-
her.
Yep.
Yeah.
That gives them an expectation.
It also gives the chair the authority if, in the event there weren't a great working relationship between the chair and the superintendent. But in the event there weren't,
Yeah,
It gives the chair the ability to say, I know you reviewed this with me, but I don't feel the rest of the board has had adequate
yeah.
opportunity to review or something to that effect.
Yeah.
It gives the chair what Ms. Karakis was saying about giving the chair the authority, because it really is the board's agenda.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, we're sitting here now, 5 of us are fine, Mr. Davis is fine, but this policy, I mean, and future boards can change policy, of course, it's been done in the past and it'll probably be done in the future, but we need to be thinking outside of us
Yes.
and think about how this is gonna
Future
affect
boards.
the board, 8 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think we're doing good.
Mr. Daggett, what did we change that last sentence to in that paragraph?
Okay, so I'm gonna just start with prior to each board meeting and workshop, and before publication of the corresponding agenda, the superintendent shall review the agenda and backup materials with the board chair. The superintendent and each school board member may, with the approval of the school board, introduce an emergency item, blah, blah, blah. The agenda and all backup material for a regular school board meeting shall be posted for the public 7 days prior to the meeting. Do you want me to continue?
Yes, well,
Any subsequent amendments of the regular meeting agenda must be posted for the public as soon as practicable, but not less than 48 hours prior to the meeting. The agenda for a special workshop, or special meeting or workshop shall be finalized and posted for the public as soon as practicable, but not less than 48 hours prior to the special meeting or workshop. And then,
What are we adding to that last sentence? That-
Yeah.
after the agenda has been posted, changes may be made only upon approval of the board member designated to preside.
that takes care of it. So are we through with that paragraph now?
I think so.
All right.
Yeah.
Move on,
I'm glad
Mr.
that you asked that,
Daggett.
because I was missing the word. Okay, so we're all set. We're now on number 5?
Yes.
Well,
Well, no,
no,
let's
no,
go
we
the
Oh,
got
I'm
next
sorry.
paragraph.
No action shall be taken by the school board on any matter unless it is shown as an item on the corresponding meeting agenda or an amendment thereto, and the backup material adequate for informed decision is delivered to the school board members at least 48 hours out. This provision shall not apply to matters which the school board determines by a separate vote to constitute an emergency item. For purposes of this policy, an emergency item exists when public health, safety, or welfare is in danger.
Okay, so I think we're through.
think
Can we
we're
go
good
to
with
5
that.
now?
Okay.
Okay, moving right along.
Great. Okay, quorum. This is a matter of law. Okay, so I just put in, remember, every one of our rules, policies, have got to have enabling statutes. So I just put that. Voting. Each school board member who is present at a school board meeting, hearing, or other proceeding shall vote on each item or matter properly presented to the board for a decision, ruling, or other official action by the school board. Unless there is or appears to be a conflict of interest or voting conflict under those statutes. Under such circumstances, the school board member may abstain but shall comply with disclosure requirements imposed by section 112-3144. If the official decision, ruling, or act occurs in the context of a quasi-judicial proceeding, a board member may abstain from voting on such matter if the abstention is to assure a fair proceeding free from potential bias or prejudice.
Could you give me an example of that last sentence?
Yeah, so you're sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, reviewing an employment disciplinary proceeding. Whether you heard it as a direct hearing, an administrative hearing, you took evidence and all that stuff, or you brought it to the Division of Administrative Hearings, and it came back to you on a recommended order. Employee says before you enter your final order, you know, whether you adopt or reject the recommended order of an ALJ, Administrative Law Judge, I think that Ms. Gilhousen is biased because she gave me a bad look on my way in. Okay? I might raise any number of things which go to the purported bias of Ms. Gilhousen. Ms. Gilhousen, under the law, has the option of abstaining. You can entirely avoid the problem by abstaining. You're not going to be a voting member on the final action.
So how does that work if there's 4 board members and 1 abstains?
It's going to be a majority of the board
Okay.
carries it. Same thing happens with bid protests.
When you say majority, what's left would be 2-2.
Yeah, and a 2-2
Well,
fails.
well, then it fails. Yeah. So
It could be a 4-0.
the fact here is
What
that
if, do you have to state what the potential bias or prejudice is?
you do not.
In the past, we've always
When you
had
abstain
that,
from
that
something,
you had to,
there's a form you have
if you
to
were
fill
going to
out.
abstain.
Does it
No.
apply in
you
this
had
case?
to
No, it wouldn't
state
apply in
that into the
quasi-judicial.
record.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's why I added that. I
Mr.
just
Jackson,
wanted
I want
everyone
you
to
to
be
be sure on that. Before, when someone, it didn't happen often, but as I recall, I'll use my friend Carol Valancourt for example. Her husband worked for Valancourt, but it was a different division than
The ones who don't
his brother, than her brother-in-law owned. And so a lot of people were thinking, you know, that she was getting some kind of monetary gain
Right.
out of that. And so sometimes she would, you know, state something, if there was something that came up where
Right.
they were at the company, her husband's division he worked for was going to, I remember this was back in the days of Mr. Scrooby, but I remember they were always stated into the record why she
Right.
would be abstaining from
Mhm.
this vote. And are you sure they don't have to state that into the
Yeah,
record?
so I'm
now?
absolutely
All
positive.
has
Let me
changed.
explain this.
Okay.
So you have experienced, even since I've been here, abstention based on a conflict of interest, you know, real or perceived, or a voting conflict, as those terms are defined by
Give
112.
me an example, I'm blank.
Yeah,
I
you know,
abstained for,
right,
For what?
for voting on the,
allocation,
Mhm.
right?
But you weren't
it's
gonna
it's the
benefit
appointments, it's
monetarily.
not the allocations, it's the
appointment.
reappointments. No, but I felt that it gave the appearance of a conflict of interest because my son's an employee.
And when
But
you
that's
do that in
different, 'cause
normal
you're not
business,
quasi-judicial at that point.
Right,
That-
and that's what he's explaining, this is different because it's a quasi-judicial hearing, so it's not the same requirements.
that's right. So when you're in doing normal business,
Okay.
right, and a board member feels I have a voting conflict or a conflict of interest,
Not quasi-judicial,
No,
judicial.
just put that out of your
regular.
brain for now.
Okay.
okay? Then you go about your forms the way that you usually do things. You state it on the record, your reasoning and all that stuff. And then I've added here what must be added and put into our policy. When you sit in a quasi-judicial capacity, that is, you act like a judge. The body itself acts like a judge, okay? And you act like a judge in certain disciplinary proceedings, employment discipline, where someone's been suspended or terminated, and they want to challenge it, and they want an evidentiary hearing. You know, ultimately, whether you kick it out to the Division of Administrative Hearings or hear it yourself, you're wearing the judge cap. And in those instances, regardless of 112, it's up to you if someone raises some sort of a bias, an alleged bias, it's up to the board member to recuse or abstain.
So
Like-
so
like
someone
for-
else has to raise the bias. A board member
Or can-
can't say, I'm just going to abstain on this vote.
Yes,
I could
I
abstain.
think you could,
Yes,
I mean,
you
you
could.
say that's a neighbor
Right,
of
say-
mine and this
say
is
you're-
why.
Yeah.
Let me see if
Or I
this is
thought
an
with this
example,
teacher, so therefore I
quasi-judicial.
don't wanna vote on this.
quasi-judicial, yeah.
Yeah, quasi-judicial. Say, in years past, you had mentored
Yeah.
Susie Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and, 8 years passed, and all of a sudden, Susie is before us for expulsion in a disciplinary hearing.
Right.
But when you were mentoring Susie, you got to know Susie quite well, her family, I mean, there is a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Susie comes before you for expulsion, and you're thinking, I'm too close to this. I mean, is that an example?
Yes, because you officially, you really do set
Because
the
you would be
quasi-judicial test.
prejudiced
Right.
towards,
If that's
giving
not-
Susie no.
Well, and I'm thinking of an employee situation. If I had worked with the employee that we were going to,
True.
Is
Like,
that-
you were very close to her.
then I would probably
Is
pull
that
But that's only,
statutory?
They didn't get along well.
yeah,
Is
but
this
that's only,
statutory, or are we just gonna put it in policy?
No, it is it's an amalgamation of statute and case law.
Okay.
so this only
Because-
applies to
because-
quasi-judicial.
In the instance that you just used, I will have to put into practice at the next board meeting, so, or the next, disciplines, so,
Well, remember, it's your choice,
okay.
right?
And
So
the
it's your
reason I
choice.
thought of that is many years ago,
Yeah.
a situation came up and I was thinking, oh, I didn't do such a good job mentoring
So
this one,
if you feel
But-
like you can separate yourself from that, then
Well, in that
you're
instance, I
fine to
did, because I
proceed.
had not seen them for
Yeah,
years,
and
and there
Right,
wasn't a
right.
personal thing, but I will say it gave me pause, but if, in your situation, this is.
if it's current,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it may
Okay.
feel
Yeah.
better to.
I mean, it's good to know.
and that's
yourself,
that's
yeah.
something you should talk
If you-
outside of this meeting with Mr.
yeah, definitely, I just didn't know if it was,
I didn't
had to be
either.
in our policy.
Yeah, it does.
But I think that's good,
It's not
because it
gonna
gives
afford
us,
that, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
I
So,
mean, it's just like going to a judge,
And
Yeah.
and
we have only
maybe, and
one,
maybe,
just give it.
the judge's household employed a housekeeper, and then the housekeeper's son was coming before, I mean, it's that kind of thing,
Yeah.
that you just,
Yeah.
you recuse yourself from that.
yeah,
And then nothing is required to fill out, there's no
Okay.
forms or
No.
anything like,
And
in my case.
But
It's just
like
a
I was
verbal.
saying, if you feel like you can separate yourself from your
Right.
personal ties, you are okay to proceed and
absolutely.
make a
That's why it's a
Yeah.
may.
And the only
It's
challenge
okay.
would be that that person who's being disciplined could challenge the decision later based on.
Yeah, they'll go to a
their-
court
Right.
of law.
But it's not going to come back on a board member for having.
No, and, you're gonna have legal counsel,
Right.
and there are very, very rare instances where
Oh,
courts
yeah.
have found that, board members should have abstained.
And we always act on the advice of attorneys.
I was just wondering what that was when I read it
Yeah,
last night.
I'm glad you
I
asked.
need an example of that because I wasn't really sure where that was going.
Well,
And
I
you know,
sure would have
the-
liked to have abstained in
The world of
past
bidding.
hearings, so I wish I had known that.
True story.
Both of you.
Brother.
That was painful.
So I also,
Study
what
stories of
happened-
the flashlight.
What happens if all five abstain?
Then it's not voted on. Goes to some other, what you call it?
What,
We
goes
can
to
kick it out to
live.
the, no, we
oh,
can
to
kick
the
it out to
DOLA,
the.
Division of Administrative.
Yeah, we're kicking it out to them.
So I did
Oh.
strike from this,
Have you ever seen a board that all five accuse themselves?
That's a good way to handle impasse.
I'm sure that I did,
We're not
I
going there.
probably blocked it out of my head.
Don't even-
Honestly, you
don't
wanna
even
know what, now
plant
that
the
you're
seed,
thinking, now that I'm thinking about it, there was,
I mean,
JEA,
what? Don't say,
JEA, at least the majority of the board members in a bid protest did abstain. And it was essentially, the courts forced
of course.
a decision to be made.
Oh.
We've had times where we've been at maybe a discipline hearing where, nobody made the motion for the superintendent's recommendation at all.
Then he had to
we
come
just
back with
sat there
another
quiet.
recommendation.
you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
it's
That's
not
right.
going anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah,
It hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
why I'm curious.
Sometimes-
yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't wanna,
We
we didn't
have-
wanna put expulsion on the record.
Yeah. Oh, I see, the
Yeah.
superintendent would make a motion to
But
do it,
it's
because we can do
interesting.
less, but
Yeah.
we can't do
I know
more.
it's
What
not
we did
exactly the
this-
same
we
thing,
had
it's not
one
abstaining, but.
where we didn't
Yeah.
put expulsion on the
Yeah.
record, but we had
Yeah.
discussed it.
Yeah.
And he
but-
changed the recommendation.
But
I had a
for
judge,
years
let's call
past,
that
sometimes
benign
the
neglect.
superintendent has made
The
a
recommendation.
recommendation,
That works, I like that phrase.
and the chair would
Yes.
ask for a motion, everybody sat quiet, and the message is sent loud and clear to the
Right.
superintendent that that recommendation's not gonna fly. So usually then the
Doesn't usually come
superintendent,
over real well.
I can
the
imagine,
superintendent
yes.
comes back in because he or she knows that the board's not gonna approve what they first said, and so they'll come back with a new recommendation.
Well, we
To
had
the
that
board.
happen with
Yeah.
with an employee discipline.
Yeah.
In my first, our first year on the board, second year maybe.
We
Where
did.
Nobody made a
It was
motion.
quiet, yeah. I can't remember which item, but I
don't
remember it happening
You'll
on the
have to tell me
board
later
forward.
which one, I don't
Yeah,
remember that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
we're
not
getting
on my watch.
Let's
Yeah.
get back focused.
Okay, so everyone is good with the voting, and I did kind
Yes.
of struck out that first couple of
Well, it's
sentences,
good 'cause
just
it
didn't
under-
mean anything.
Yeah.
In the
Just learn
process of
something.
doing this,
How to
it
say
explained
yes.
to us,
Notes, yeah.
and we learned something out of this. I hear
All right, we're on minutes, and here what I did is just, keep it simple, stupid. This is expressed by the education code, this language that I put in. The superintendent shall keep and maintain all such minutes and records as are necessary to set forth clearly all official actions and proceedings of the school board. The minutes and the records shall be kept and maintained as public records, subject to the provisions of Chapter 119. The minutes of the school board, now we're talking about the content. The minutes of the school board shall include an audio or audio-visual recording of the public meetings and proceedings of the school board. Notice how I put public meetings and proceedings. The official minutes shall include the date and time upon which the meeting and proceeding was called to order.
See, now I think we should keep that sentence that says, or that language that's stricken that says, also be kept as written action and summary minutes to include the date, the time. I think it's really important that, and Ms. Bush sends us a summary of the minutes after every meeting.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to have it there, that there's also a written journal
Okay.
kept of every meeting. And I know
That's
not
a good
only
point.
do we have the videotape, but like right now, at every meeting, there is a microphone there that you keep a recording of that. So we have 3 checks and balances there.
Gotcha.
I think that's important to keep out.
Any objections to that? I think that's
So
a good
add
point.
as the written action back.
So also kept as written action or
So
summary
just keep that in.
to include
Okay. Okay.
the date and time upon which the meeting or proceeding was called to order and adjourned, the names of the school board members in attendance, in person or via electronic means, a summary of motions, resolutions, or other matters before the board, and votes cast by each school board member. Shall be the duty of each school board member, I will take of the school board out. It shall be the duty of each school board member to see to it that both the matter and his or her written vote, or his or her vote thereon are properly recorded in the minutes. In the event that there is a technical malfunction in the preparation of audio or audiovisual recording of a public meeting, that fact shall be noted in the minutes. And, okay, any other matter may be made part of the official minutes by direction of the chair or majority of school board members. All recordings of public school board meetings shall be promptly posted on or otherwise accessible through the school district website after the meeting or proceeding is concluded.
I have a question on this. On our website, you can, or through, I guess, the YouTube channel, and maybe if you know on the district website, you can access, I want to say back to like 2014 meetings. So how do you get the meetings that are earlier than that?
There's
I think
something-
Through EduVision.
Yeah, I think it's
There's
stated
another.
on there, we were using a different format or something, and there's 2 places where you can click to look at them. And the
Right.
first one,
And I checked both. I was looking for an old meeting and couldn't get access to it through the internet, so I just
Was it
wondering-
after the meeting, after the new website? Because I found there's a number of,
This was in January.
okay.
Little blips. You find
That's when
what?
I call
Yeah.
Mrs. Bush.
And
We,
that's what-
we also, in addition to what they keep on the website, we try to make an old school DVD
Okay.
that we also keep. So we've got audio,
just
we've
request
got
it that
DVD, and we've got, you know.
Sometimes I get lost in there too, trying to find something, but usually I'll call her and she'll say, tell you
Yeah.
right where to go.
And we record far more than most boards.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's something, you know, you
Just, I'm
recall.
thinking those issues that cycle around, like what we were covering in January was the science textbook
Right.
adoption. So I wanted to see how the previous board handled it.
Oh, yeah, back from
It was like
08.
2012 or
Yeah.
2008.
Yes,
And
I-
and that
it
would have been in
wasn't available on the
Eduvision,
website.
it wouldn't have been on YouTube.
It wasn't on Eduvision. I think Eduvision only goes back to.
See,
like-
I picked up the minutes, that's how I got it.
I'll tell you
That was
this,
all the
Probably
minutes for that
before we
meeting.
started live streaming them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I think that's made from what we post is made from the live stream.
Okay, so that wouldn't have been on a DVD?
So you may have to come
Oh,
to
it
the.
would be on a
It
DVD.
would be on a DVD versus.
Okay.
I mean, there's a way to get it, you just got,
Mhm.
she's the gatekeeper, I mean,
Yeah,
when I
email
can't
me
find
the
something, I
date
have to
now.
I
call
don't need
her.
it now,
Well-
but just if something like that.
Well, that's true, I mean, sometimes you wanna go back because you knew it had been up 10 years before.
Exactly.
Because in fact, it was January of '08, because, and I thought, strange, here it is, 10 years later, here we, and you say things,
And historical
Going-
knowledge is
going-
valuable
yeah.
when you're taking on the
Yes.
same issues.
oh, absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
I can tell you this, that Nicole
And try to remember what
and
happened 10
IT,
years ago.
Nicole Snyder, and Jeremy and his team.
Absolutely,
I can tell you
and
this, that Nicole
and try to remember
and-
what
and
happened 10
IT,
years ago.
Nicole Snyder and Jeremy and his team are looking, that's one of the items on the new improved website that we're working on structurally,
Yeah,
to make it easier and more simplistic.
right.
You know, one-stop shop for past meetings.
Yeah.
Not
Oh, I
like
was,
two.
Right.
I was looking yesterday for code of student conduct and policy and stuff, and
It's hard.
it took me
We need a
15
search
minutes
engine
of
for that.
weeding through trying to figure out where to find it.
I would
And I
bring
just
those
started
issues
clicking on
to
everything till
Nicole.
eventually I found it.
Well,
I
if
do
you
like
think
how the
about-
county commission does theirs where their agenda is posted. You could click on it and see the video recording from just that section.
Yeah.
Really?
That
And
is-
not have to like,
You're
go
kidding.
through
Yeah.
ours.
So,
Ooh,
They have a
the-
better
that would be
process.
wonderful.
and you have to think
Then they'll
about
have to go
something
through all
like
the
the Code
forms.
of Student Conduct is a very good example. If we have such a hard time finding it,
The
that's where the
parents
public
find
says
it.
we're not transparent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's not easy to find. They can't go to it and say.
I don't even remember, I
I
couldn't
had to
tell
call
you
Mr.
now,
Wingate
if I was to go
today.
look for it now, I don't remember what I did, I've clicked on
We
so many
mentioned it at a
things.
workshop, I think.
Yeah.
Didn't we talk about a search engine?
Yeah,
You
we
had
did.
mentioned it.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did.
I think
that's a
that would
great
be
idea.
excellent, because
Well,
it,
the Neola,
parent-
if you go
Right.
with
Go on
them,
to
theirs
number
comes with,
8.
that's part of the
There's
package. It
something
comes
that
with the
caught
search engines for
in
your
board
policies.
membership of the school board that I,
Which one?
it's back in, on page 2, B, membership of the school board. And you're adding Clay County School District.
that, I mean,
But read that
that's
sentence.
not what we're talking about today, but I'd like to know more about
B?
that.
Yeah, membership of the school board.
Okay,
Page 2.
okay.
Okay.
Because I don't know anything about
Yeah.
it,
So
but you've
the
had
sentence
experience with
says-
it.
Well, I just
It's the
went to
third
my
line down.
policy,
Each school board
FSBA
member
policy
shall be
thing,
nominated and
and so
elected for a
many of
term
the
of 4
boards
years
across
by
the state use
qualified
And what do we
electors
use?
of the entire.
We just do it ourselves.
This
It
is
should
it.
say Clay
Yeah.
County.
Yeah.
It should not say Clay County School District because that's just the school
I got you.
district. It should just say by the
They
entire
automatically
county.
update it for
Or
you.
by, take out entire and just put
I'll
the
just put
electors
county.
of Clay
Wait,
County.
where are you, Janice?
There's something that caught my eye and I was just pointing out to
All
Mr.
right.
Daggett while you were
Yeah,
chatting.
do.
On page 2, B, where it says membership of the school board,
Just a
Mr.
minute.
Daggett has added Clay County School District.
Just a minute.
And if you read that sentence,
This is on the
It says-
second page of this document.
it says the school board of Clay County consists of 5 members, each of whom shall be a qualified elector of the district in which he or she serves, and each of whom shall be a resident of the residence area from which he or she is elected. Each school board member shall be nominated and elected for a term of 4 years by qualified electors of the entire, and I said it should say entire county, or it should just say
Clay.
electors of Clay County and not Clay County School District, because the Clay County School District is
Right.
it's
It
just
should be
this.
Clay
So
County.
that
Qualified
caught my eye that was wrong.
Just say qualified electors, leave out
Of Clay
entire,
Of the-
and just
of-
put
of
Clay
Clay
County,
County.
period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll do that.
So let me
Okay.
ask you another
That's-
question.
Okay.
In that same sentence.
Because they're the voters, Clay County voters.
In the same sense, we're not nominated.
No, we're not nominated, she's right.
Shall be elected.
Take out shall be nominated
Yeah, we don't
completely and
get
just put
elected,
shall be
nominated.
elected for a term of 4 years.
These school members
Electors
Shall
of Clay
be.
County.
Shall be elected for a term of 4 years by the qualified electors of Clay
That's
County.
interesting, because that language has always been in there, and it's also in the statute. the nominated.
nobody ever read
I
it.
guess what that's pointing to is where the,
Well, there are
governor has
some
to
that are
Each
district.
member of the
Well,
board
maybe
shall
you have to
serve
leave it,
as-
if
School
it's in the
districts that are
statute, then you have to
district.
leave it in there. If it's in
It
the
is in the
statute,
statute. I can
we
tell
have
you
to
that.
leave it in there.
The entire district.
I'm not sure that that's
No,
the
the
way it's
nominated
worded.
and elected.
The
Each
nominated
member
part.
of the board shall serve as
The
a
reason
representative
he's
of the
saying
entire
it is in the
district rather
statute
than
as if the
as a
governor has
representative of the
to
school
appoint
board's
somebody.
I'm just guessing.
member residence area.
I want you to check and make sure that
I
that
was, I
word's in
crossed out
Serve
statute.
district
as
and
the
Clay
representative
and
of the entire-
county, rather than as the representative of the school district, of school board.
It makes more sense to
Well,
just leave
the
it as
statutes
district.
say, once you're elected, you represent the entire county, so why are we
Now
saying
we
the
are talking
entire
about the
school
school
district?
district.
Why don't we say, shall serve as representative of the entire school district, yeah.
Which line are you talking about?
The
last
one.
Yeah, it seems like it was probably fine to leave it the way it was. Represent the entire district rather than a representative of the school board member residence area. It's, yeah, because we do represent the
Yeah,
entire district.
that's fine, just so leave it.
Yeah, I would just leave that as it was
we
and
are
take
so
out
good.
school.
Okay,
So are you gonna leave shall be nominated in there too?
I'll look.
Yeah, check that out, I'm just
In
not
any
sure.
event, it was historically
check
in there, so
language.
I like the elected thing.
Yeah,
I'll look.
In Clay County.
And
I
then
just
on
don't-
that last
district.
sentence,
It just
we're gonna
doesn't seem right to
remove
say
school and just leave
nominated,
it as entire district
because-
rather than as a representative.
because then you're getting
We're
into,
just gonna leave
you
it
know,
as-
if a school
take out
member,
school district and
you know,
leave it as
passes
entire
away, then
district.
the governor appoints, and
Right.
we don't wanna
I
get
don't
into all the
know.
weeds and.
I don't
Whatever
know
you
if I
choose.
agree.
Do what?
Do you think it should say?
Well, I think it should say school district, because what we were differentiating when we had the conversation was that we don't just represent our district,
Right,
like as in
Good
District
point.
One.
Yeah, she's
three.
right, she's right.
That was why we had
Leave it
him
as
add
school
school
district.
district.
You're right.
Yeah,
All right,
to
so keep
differentiate.
that in there.
Yeah.
so he's gonna check
So
the
I'm just
language
gonna
on
do the Clay County.
Just that
nomination
Clay
and
County is the
everything
only
else will
change
stay
in
the
that.
same.
Okay. And
Okay.
that just caught my eye last night. I'm sorry we
Okay.
didn't
No.
catch it last
Mr.
time.
Daggett, so you're gonna check the language on this nominated, and then everything else will just stay the same?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
okay,
We're back up to
thank you.
Number 8.
number 8, conduct at meetings. Y'all, we are actually making progress.
We're
Okay,
just very slow.
but hey, we said
How
we
many
were
of
gonna
these
do it
meetings will it
correctly,
take
no
before we
matter how
get
long
through
it
the star
takes. We didn't
section?
know it was gonna be our whole.
I'll have been retired
year.
and dead.
Okay, Mr. Daggett, we're up to 8, and
rest
it's
will
called
be easier after this.
conduct at meetings.
That's what I keep hoping. Okay, conduct at meetings. All attendees and participants in any school board meeting are expected to act and speak in a courteous, professional, and respectful manner to each other. When necessary, the public shall be informed that it is unlawful to knowingly and substantially disrupt or interfere with public school board meetings.
So the stricken part, it's actually, if they disrupt a meeting, it is a misdemeanor offense or a second degree offense. And it was explained to me that, and I can't remember the examples, but it's actually 2 separate misdemeanors. Why would we want to take that out? Do we?
Because I don't think that school board members ought to be in a place where they give legal advice to people. So that is an oddity to have that in there. What you're doing here is you're advising the public through your policy that you're empowered, that they are to be acting in a courteous manner, and that it's unlawful
Okay.
to knowingly disrupt, period. You know, criminal code changes all the time. There may be civil. I'm
Okay.
sure that there are civil liabilities that also. So, you know, if it's civil, why don't we also tell them all the reasons why we can sue them too? So I don't, that's why I struck it.
This seems like to advise, counsel, or instruct students, individuals, or school board employees to disrupt a school board meeting that only such action may be. I don't know if we need all that either. I mean,
Where are you? You're in the second.
I'm just all that
Well,
crossed
you're
out
stricken.
stuff.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, if someone
is advising anyone to disrupt our meetings, and we find out about it, the fact that it's not in our policy is not gonna stop us from
That's
acting on
exactly
it.
right.
Right.
Got that.
And we've got deputies there who
Hey.
can act on any problem that
We're
should
not-
arise, so.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what we say in
I
this
don't know where
next
he's gone.
paragraph.
He's disappeared.
Yeah.
The presiding officer may order,
That's probably why it was
I
added.
don't know.
Hey,
I believe it may have
don't
been.
speak too soon.
Hey, knock on wood.
We don't have enough jelly beans in there.
Oh, Lord.
If Mr. Davis
So-
was here, there wouldn't be
So
any.
what do y'all wanna do on this first
I think it's
paragraph?
fine
it's
if you
fine the way it
can.
is.
Yeah,
Just leave it alone?
Yeah.
And leave, and so you're crossing out all that
Yep.
language on the
Yeah.
end?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, got the next paragraph.
presiding officer
Well, I
may
think we
order
can
the
handle
removal,
that.
this comes from statute as well, from a public meeting held by the school board of any person engaging in improper conduct interfering with the expeditious orderly process of such meeting, provided such presiding officer has first issued a warning that continued interference with the orderly process of the meeting will result in removal. Any law enforcement authority or sergeant at arms designated by the presiding officer shall remove any person ordered removed pursuant to this provision and Florida law.
Yeah, and this is good for whoever serves as chairman in the future. You must give them a warning first.
Yes,
You
that is
can't
very
just,
important.
This is your warning. Is
this-
that what you
this-
say? This is your one warning?
or I don't even know if you
I
have to
am
call it a
warning you.
warning. You can just say, if you continue to act in this way, you will be removed from there. Then when they do it again,
Okay.
you call the
Yeah.
deputy.
Yeah, our friend,
We've had to do that
our
before.
friend, one of our current, that goes to a lot of commission meetings and comes to our meetings and all, got, asked to leave a St. John's School Board meeting last
He
week.
went to a
What was he
St.
doing in
John's
St.
school
John's?
board meeting?
And he got asked by the police
Sharing
to
the love.
leave in 2 days, twice in one day, because he then left the St. John's School Board meeting and went to the county commission meeting, and I was had to be escorted out of there
Are
too.
you talking?
Wow.
I'm not going to guess. Okay.
Last week.
Wow.
Holy
Maybe
smoly.
he's looking at property.
We're just fortunate. Okay.
property's
All right, let's go to
foreclosed.
public
Oh,
comment.
really?
Okay, public comment. There's substantial changes here.
Do we want to delete a presentation from the audience? Only
Yes.
because isn't that how it's labeled on our agenda?
We used
Well,
to call it
the thing is, there's
presentations.
no
Now I
B.
think you've started putting.
So, you know what I'm saying? That's why I took it off there.
Right.
I put it in parentheses.
Okay.
On the template, it says, presentations from the audience, and I put public comment
Why
in
don't we just change it to
parentheses.
say public comment on our agenda?
Yeah, I would do
It
that.
makes more sense. It's what
Because
it
I
is.
mean, honestly, when people turn in cards
Yeah.
up in the corner, because you know you're trying to sort out your cards so you don't forget somebody, and we just put PC for
Yeah.
public comment. A presentation, I'll tell you, presentation from the audience, and then what do we call the old 10-minute
Citizens
speakers?
request.
It's
Scheduled
confusing.
citizens.
It is
I have to stop
Well,
thinking, now
and
which
when
one's
we
3 minutes,
built
which one's
Yeah, I
10
know.
minutes?
That new template, I left it because that's what the policy said.
Right.
But yes, if we change
Let's
the
change
policy to
that.
public comment,
Yeah,
we can take
I like
that out.
that
and
better.
just say,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I can do that.
okay,
Public comment.
okay, so we'll
It
cross
was
out.
asked, why did we strike this? Because we didn't have a B, the presentation from the audience.
Okay,
So that's why I labeled it public comment, just to
Okay.
keep it simple.
Do we, do they have to speak on, an agenda item?
no,
No.
So let me, can I read through this and then I think
Yeah.
it'll be
Yeah.
a
then
good
we'll go back and,
opportunity.
because I've had
So
the same
here,
thought.
I'm catching up with the law, a member of the public, not a citizen, a member of the public, who wishes to comment or speak about a matter on the agenda of a school board meeting shall, before the meeting begins or as soon as possible thereafter, and using the speaker cards provided, submit in writing his or her name, address, the name of any organization or group represented, and the agenda item numbers or topics which the speaker wishes to address. Those who are speaking on agenda items shall be permitted to do so before the board takes action on the agenda item.
Right.
That is a necessity of law. Now, I'm gonna read through this and then come back to what I struck.
Okay,
A time limit of 3 minutes will be imposed on each public comment speaker, unless the time is extended by the presiding officer.
right.
And God knows I'm not gonna ask the presiding officer to extend time again. Speaker cards shall not be accepted after the school board begins the discussion agenda. Only the individual submitting the speaker card is allowed to address the school board for the allotted time. Speaking time may not be yielded or given by one speaker to another. The superintendent and school board members may ask questions of and request further explanation from the speaker. The time used by the superintendent and school board members for questions and explanations shall not be counted against the time allotted.
Okay, let's go back,
So the part that was stricken.
What I struck.
let's go back, let him go back through that and then we'll talk about it.
So here, I'm not speaking to non-agenda items, okay? The law has it that you have to allow public comment, right? On matters that are gonna be acted on, that are before you take final action, you gotta give the public a chance to comment. And if they're substantially interested, as that term is defined by law, you gotta do other things, in an evidentiary hearing. So I just simply kept it absent.
No,
So that's one. You may also embed in all of your meetings, all of your, or some, at the conclusion, I'll just read what I struck. At the conclusion of the agenda, so just imagine an agenda for each one of your types of meetings. Right? At the conclusion of the agenda, a citizen, which is not gonna be a citizen, it's gonna be a member of the public.
And we've changed it from conclusion, that's when we used to have public comments, so.
Yeah.
they
it's
used to
now
be at the very
beginning.
end of the
We moved it to
agenda.
the beginning.
So
Yeah,
I'm
and that-
not gonna make them wait to the end of
Yeah.
the meeting to talk about.
And you can limit that too, I think that's a good idea.
I think
So let me ask
during,
you,
I
let me
think
ask
during
you,
public comment,
so they can speak about anything they want to during public comment?
That's what we've always been told, that
They
they can
can.
come and, talk about football
See, I
helmets.
think the county commission, it's been a while since I've been to one of their meetings, but I think they changed theirs to where specific agenda item comments,
go before the item.
no, I'm sorry. So things on the, if it's on the, I can't think of an instance now that would not be on our agenda.
Yeah.
But
Well, a
very
lot of times
often,
if
quite
people-
often, people come and speak on things that we're going to talk about,
Right.
right?
But how about if
not
it's
the
something like
specific item.
football field, lighting, and it's not on our agenda? They still
Right.
should be able to come and fill out a card and say,
Because a lot of
You
times
know.
that's the way the board becomes
Yeah.
aware of
Yeah,
something.
you're right.
remember the
you know.
parking lot lights at
What I
Oak
was
Ridge
just
High
thinking
School?
what I was just thinking that they somehow, and I'm confusing how they do it, but somehow the county commission has the people who are speaking on things that the commission, the board, doesn't already know about. They make them wait until they finish their business, till the end.
So I think that would be smart to add a second section for public comment at the end of the meeting. So you take your cards that are for agenda items and let them speak before we discuss it. And then at the end, you have a section for public comment for people who want to bring.
Well,
What's
But
happened
normally-
before, when we would
yeah.
have meetings till midnight, and people would be sitting there that just wanted to say, hey, we need some lights on the football
Right.
field,
Yeah.
and the board felt like that's really
Yeah.
not trying to be nice to the public,
Yeah.
and so and we have moved the, what
Public
used to be at
comment.
the end of the meeting up.
And it hasn't
Into the-
extended
it-
it.
No.
It hadn't been abused. I
No.
think, we might have to go back and look at it. If it became abused, like in years past, some people abused their comments, but
Yeah.
Well, I could see it kind of becoming the reason I'm asking, the
It
reason I'm
could
just
slow down the
challenging the
meeting,
thought
though. That's
is
the thing. If
they
it-
could almost filibuster the meeting, and
Well,
then
that's
you
true.
never
Right.
get to the point of
of what the meeting.
the
there.
agenda.
Now, if someone fills out a card and it's something on the consent item,
How about this?
they'll get, it's pulled and then they'll get
Yeah.
to speak before the item. And anytime an item comes up, they're gonna speak
always do
before we
cards before the
vote on
item.
that item. But what we're talking about is those that are just like, when are y'all gonna plant some trees at my school? It's
Right.
there. That's nothing to do with any agenda item, so
Right.
it's up to the
But
board
they
now
want
to
us to hear.
decide, do you wanna have them wait to the very, very end? Cause
think so.
like, sometimes when we've got things like, evolution and textbook adoptions and stuff like that, that's gonna get her, or if we're doing something to do with, that gets the teachers all upset. I mean, someone could sit there till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and
Yeah.
and what happened, they'll just get disgusted and leave.
Right.
So
Yeah.
where do
I
we
think it's-
find the fine line between, trying to be accessible to the public to be able to have a comment, and then, you know, a lot of times our meetings are over by 9 o'clock, that's
Yeah.
fine. But if we get one of those 1 o'clock AM meetings,
So you're saying you think we should go back to the way we used to have it?
just have everything at the end?
Not
May I?
everything. I
Just the
think,
ones
I
that's not
think
on
we
the
deal with
agenda?
business first, and whoever has come to talk about the business items that we're addressing on this agenda should have priority.
Yeah,
because
they
that's
they
what the
do
meeting
that
is
before
for,
we
is for the
vote.
agenda. So
Yeah.
if there's something they want to talk about that's not on the agenda, then that should wait till the agenda's dealt with. That's just my opinion.
But the items that would be on the agenda would be, the cards would be right before we vote on that item anyway.
Right.
So
But
that
she's talking
would
about
mean
things that are not on
moving
the
the whole
agenda.
public comment to the bottom then.
No, we're not gonna do that. We can't do that because they have to speak before we vote on an item,
Right,
whether it's
and that's,
consent or.
you would have that
Right.
card, so
Right.
we
But
would
what-
pull it from the consent.
What we're talking about is things that are not on the agenda,
Right.
that a citizen just
Right.
wants to come and
Right.
talk to
And
us for
right
3
now, they
minutes.
talk in the beginning.
Who determines when the public comment's going to be?
We
It
could-
comes
No,
right,
you say we,
on the
but
agenda
is that a
template.
chairman thing, or is
isn't it
that?
a template thing?
I'm
It's
glad
a
that you
chair.
should.
Well, but
Superintendent thing.
you're saying, and we used to do it at the end. And now we're doing it at the beginning.
The
Because-
chairman.
And is it the chairman
I-
who determines?
Yeah,
Well, she
Addison
And
did.
said,
so
We
in
don't know,
this-
it's not
in
policy,
this-
we
Yeah.
did.
Right,
just
and
said,
in
I
this,
think we should move
instead
it.
of saying at the conclusion
But
of
nobody
the
objected.
agenda,
but I think we were
Just
all in
saying-
agreement with moving it.
during public comment, a citizen may address the board on items not on the agenda.
I'm
And
gonna,
then determining, and that way, if we leave it as a generic, then we decide to continue at the beginning. Because
Well-
personally, I'm in favor of keeping it at the beginning of the meeting.
I am
But
too.
if
I
the
am too.
board shifts at some point
I
and
am
says,
too,
no, we
only
want to
bec-
move it to the end of the
Yeah.
meeting,
I'll-
then during
What I-
public comment
What I
is
am
sufficient.
doing is when Karen brings me the cards and we sort them out.
Right, right.
So that I can pull them, and then there's always one or two.
Sure.
Sometimes none, sometimes 3 or 4, that are about things that have,
Nothing
I'll say,
to do-
Karen,
yeah.
what is this?
Right.
We have no earthly idea what they want to talk about. And
know
so
who, yeah.
after, but in public comments, I go ahead and give them their 3 minutes
Right.
and let them talk, so then they can leave,
Right, right.
Because we may still have some real hairy discussion items
what do you
to
think
go
about this
through.
collectively? At the discretion of the presiding officer,
Wait, where are you?
just where I struck out, I'm kind of.
At the
Okay.
conclusion
Okay,
of
so-
the agenda,
well,
but now he's saying.
Here's
yeah.
a new sentence.
All right.
At the discretion of the presiding officer, members of the public may address the board on items not on the agenda at the conclusion of a meeting.
I mean,
You don't
that's,
even have
Well,
to put
I'm
in.
the only
I don't
that
even
feels
think
that
at, I don't even think
way.
at the discretion of the presiding officer, because the law says they've got a right to speak.
Yeah. No, the law says that you must hear, and they have a right to speak on
Right.
actions that are before the board,
Right.
before the board takes final action.
Right.
There's no,
You gonna get us
Right.
in trouble.
well, there's no right out there.
And can I'm sorry,
No.
I know I'm not a school board.
No, but you've
But-
had years of experience, so
Well, when it used to be at the end,
mhm.
we did have to pull items to discussion because the public comments came at the end, and there was no way somebody could make a public comment on a consent agenda item
Why?
unless we pulled it to discussion.
We have
we
to,
had to hear
yeah.
from them
So you
first.
have a member of the public coming, pulling an item to discussion.
Right.
By having the public comment section before now, there have been months, we haven't, just because somebody filled out a card, we have not pulled the item, we've allowed them to speak. They could just be
Yeah.
making positive comments,
Right.
and there's no
Right.
need to move it to discussion.
Right.
I guess my point is, once you hear their public comments and you know maybe they brought up something that really is noteworthy.
Something we need to, yeah.
Then the board chair can pull the item to discussion. But for now, with all the public comments being at the beginning, we're letting, whether it's on the agenda or not on the agenda, everybody speaks before public comment. And I guess my point is.
Wait a minute, before public comments.
Before the adoption of the consent agenda,
Right.
I'm sorry. So we're not necessarily having to pull it just
No.
because somebody wants to speak to it.
I
Pull
think
it
Ms.
to
McKinnon did it
discussion.
differently than we had ever done it before. Now, if got items that are on the consent agenda, and we get a card on item, whatever,
C3, yeah.
D3,
Mm-hmm.
or, no,
Or
the
C3,
consent,
yeah.
C3, then I'm of the old school, I still then will say, move approval of the consent agenda except for the item pulled, D3, whoever makes that motion. And so then that item has, in my mind, becomes a discussion item, not necessarily, I don't know if you want to call it move to the discussion,
Well-
but then we go back and take that item up, the person speaks from the audience, and then the board takes it up and acts on it. That's the way we did it for years. But I know when Jonna was chairman, if there was 2 or 3 items pulled from consent, she would have all of those people speak at one time on about the different items.
Well,
It was
and-
very,
And I
it
guess
got
I'm
real.
looking
On
at,
the
Focus
consent
wasn't on
agenda?
it, yeah.
The downside that I'm not speaking to that, because I see both sides of
Yeah.
that, and really it doesn't matter to me. And
I'm
I do
comfortable
like,
doing it
I
like I do
like,
it.
I like public comment at the beginning, but our meetings have gotten a lot shorter too, and I don't know which is, it's the chicken and the egg. I
Yeah.
don't know which one's.
Yeah.
But the downside,
Just-
is that, like, at one of our last couple recent meetings, I don't remember which one, I looked in my bag, I don't have my notebook with me, but I remember specifically there were people who spoke during public comment about things not on the agenda, just, wanting to speak public comment. Not many, it was a handful, maybe 5, 6, which is 15, 18 minutes. But then there were people who you called their name on specific agenda items.
they'd gone.
And they had left because our
Yes.
meeting took so long. And that is an abuse of not listening to we had to take action because those items were on our agenda and we didn't hear those members of the public.
There's a lot of times we'll have like one specific issue that drives the public to our meeting.
Right.
And we don't get to that issue until the very end
Right.
of the meeting because we've done so much of all the, the awards
Well,
and the presentations and all
We
that stuff.
got the school
And so now we're
showcase and the talent show and
Right.
the best principal and the outstanding team leader. I mean, it's got to where when our meetings start at 6, it's really
So-
6:30, 6:45 before we really get to start
To
our
the meat of
meeting.
it.
So and this is kind of
truthfully,
beyond that, but it's not, I've asked some other boards, and a number of other boards across the state hold 2 meetings a month. And one's in the morning and one's at night. And they do a lot of their recognitions and things, so they spread it out. Because we really do spend 60 to 90 minutes of our meetings
Of the good
of all
stuff.
that stuff.
Putting our best foot forward, I think of it.
And when we have the public who just wants to see the board conduct business, they're waiting that long.
Yeah. The downside of that, if you do it in the mornings, so many of the
The
moms and
parents
dads are
want
out
to take off
working,
work.
they can't.
Well, I'm not saying those recognitions. There's
Yeah.
a lot of, so I know Alachua and St. John's I've asked, and they do a lot of their stuff, like the personnel stuff and all that people really aren't coming to speak on.
That are
They're
kinda
not
like,
watching. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the budgetary stuff and all that's just
I don't know, that's,
conducting. They do it in the mornings.
and I guess my point on pulling the consent items to let the public speak, to me, if we've pulled it, it now requires a separate vote.
right.
So if I move it electronically in the agenda, y'all all have to refresh your screen in order for it to jump down into
Right.
the discussion.
But how else are you gonna do it, Karen?
Well, and I guess that's the point, that maybe you let them speak and then you say, they've made up a really good point. We do need to, I feel like we need to move this to discussion, so let's do it now. We move it, everybody refreshes. But if they're
But
just.
if you don't move it to discussion, it was excluded when we passed the consent agenda.
No, because they're speaking before.
They speak before the consent
See,
agenda.
Presentations from the audience and public comments comes right here. Then you've got all of the consent agenda. And then your adoption of the consent agenda comes at the end of all the items. So you've got the adoption of the consent agenda here.
So what if we handle the consent agenda like we handle the discussion agenda when it comes to public comment? That if there's a consent agenda item a member of the public wants to speak on, they speak on that before we vote on it.
Right.
But the actual public comment section is at the end of the meeting. Does that make sense? So that way we're handling all the business first.
The only downside I could see with what you're saying is, I don't mean this to sound disrespectful at all. We've kind of got the public trained where they know when we're gonna take
Right.
public comment. What we want to avoid, that I see does happen at some of the county commission meetings, is, because they take public comment, or they used to take public comment at the beginning and the end. And you'd have the same members of the public that wanna, hammer home a
Come on,
point,
one more
speaking
time.
twice. What we don't want is that. So I think with it being right before the consent agenda, the only thing I could see happening with what Ms. Bush is bringing up is if say, for instance, a member of the public spoke on a consent agenda item because it was on the consent agenda and no one had pulled it to discussion.
Right.
So they go in the public comment queue. Then if one of us said, that's a really good point, I'd like to discuss that further, moving it to the discussion agenda, is that considered a change to the agenda, or can we do that?
No, you couldn't.
You're still taking
But
action at the same
Where
time.
I think confusion comes in is if 3 or 4 items they want to speak about 3 or 4 items on the consent, they're all coming at you at
the
one,
same
Right.
are you saying you'd go
You're
back?
not giving it your
and-
undivided attention like you would.
I
if
guess,
it had
are
been
you
pulled.
saying, Ms. Bush, then that you would vote on each item?
Only
That-
if we chose to.
If we move them, if we're pulling them to discussion,
Then it's
Well,
separate
Well, I mean, if
item.
they want to speak to them, we've got to pull them for them to be
Yeah.
able to speak,
Which is
right?
how we
No.
always did it in the
No.
past.
no, because
No.
they're speaking before you adopt it.
But they're
on this.
speaking before we adopt the entire consent agenda.
Correct.
But
So-
then what I'm saying is that if you've got people that want to speak about 3 or 4 different items that are on the consent, then it would come back to the board,
Whether the
and,
board wants to pull it.
and if the board,
The board may not want to pull it.
if the board just wanted to go ahead and approve it, but if there was an item that say, at that point, you're gonna have to pull it to
We've
discussion.
had people that have come and they just wanted to say a good thing about, I
Yeah.
like the way you're
Yeah.
doing this, I just
Yeah.
want to say, I
Yes.
like this.
Yeah, be sure and
thing."
frame those.
Yeah.
So your current policy, just, let's take a look at this
Okay.
at a 3,000 foot, right? Your current policy, you've talked about the practice, says at the conclusion of the agenda, a citizen may address the board on items not on the agenda. So
they-
we're obviously not following
Right.
Right,
that
we never
policy of
changed the
practice.
Right, we didn't change it.
Let me suggest this.
Same thing with the
I
date and
just
time
looked
of
at
our meeting.
Alachua's, and I was talking to their school board attorney on this just a couple of weeks back. Here's how they sidestepped the whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
The public has, this is in their school board, school board meeting. The public has a right to address the school board at any regular, special, or emergency meeting prior to the board taking final action. That is what the law requires, before you take final action at
So
one of
that's
these
all their
meetings.
policy
And it doesn't
says?
specify when.
Then it says, the school board may adopt a procedure for the public comment, including imposing a reasonable time restriction on the length of the individual's comments to the board. They're not parsing between agenda and non-agenda. But in no case may those comments be limited to less than 3 minutes. I know that's what they're changing. The public may also address the school board at a workshop. So that's what Alachua says, and that is very similar to other school board policies that I've seen. That's why I thought it best to simply strike this, or if you just put in generic language similar to that which we had. I'm saying, at the discretion of the presiding officer, members of the public may address the board on non-agenda items.
I like that.
Period.
And that, we can do it whenever the
Yeah.
chairman wants to do it.
Is
Yeah.
that,
I
you're
like
adding
that.
that?
Hey, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, that way you can move it, because if you have it,
Well,
and
if I
has
know-
more than a
Flexibility.
crowd, then you
Well,
can't.
that's flexible.
Well, this is the thing,
Yeah.
if there's nothing big and hairy under discussion that we
Right.
know's coming up,
Right.
I'll just go ahead and let them speak
Well,
right
and you've
then.
said, you
But
have
if-
done
but
that.
if it looks like we're gonna have 2 or 3 hours and they're gonna be lined up, I think you've got go ahead and let them speak.
So one thing,
A lot of
I
it's
remember,
common sense.
a lot of time, like, one time, I don't remember specifics, but recently at a meeting, I remember you saying, you know, y'all, for the interest of time, I understand a lot of these people are here to speak on this item, but I'm gonna go, would anyone object to me going ahead and letting them speak at this time? And I don't remember the details, but no one objected. So clearly, we didn't have an issue
Hey,
with what you
you
were.
sitting there are gonna tell the public? No,
But,
no,
but
no,
I could
no.
also see you doing it the other way. I could also see you saying, we have a whole lot of public comment cards here that, and we do want to hear from you, members of the public, but these aren't on things that our agenda is, and we have a very full agenda tonight. So out of respect for the public who is here to speak on our business, I could also see you saying, tonight, we're gonna move this to the end of the meeting. That, what he is saying, it would
Gives you the
allow you to do
flexibility
that.
to do that.
And
And you
remember,
would have to be very, very diplomatic in what you say.
Sure.
and remember,
That would be-
there are gonna,
But
that's
that would give
why,
you an option.
speaking of options, that's why the law permits you to meet in special and emergency meetings. You know, say you have 50 people there bringing the same issue to you.
True.
That you consider to be an emergency or worthy of a special meeting. That's what you say, that's what you do at the end of your meeting.
So could you also say, this is, after you've taken that comment?
I guess, yes, through Robert's rules, a member of the board could say, table this and have a special meeting. You know, if all of a sudden the public has brought something, even if we're not gonna take action on it at that time,
That's right.
we could ask for
wanna be
a
heard.
special meeting to occur at least 48 hours out.
Okay, so now, Ms.
that kinda
Bush, now I
covers it
am
with that
confused on
language.
something, because I've always done it the old way. If someone fills out a card and they want to speak to an item on the consent, we've always taken a motion except for the items B3 and B6, or D3 and or C3 and 3.6. And then I would let them speak to those, we'd go ahead and approve the consent agenda, but then those items will move to discussion.
I don't think
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
And I think sometimes it's been that it has been, we knew ahead of time it was
Yeah. A board
controversial.
member
and
pulled
a board
it.
member pulled it,
Right.
and
Right.
then we had.
We
to
Move it on to
fill out
discussion.
cards
I think
for
you
it.
walk a fine line when you start letting the public control your agenda.
I think the way you've done it is appropriate.
Yes.
And here's
Doing
the
it the way
point,
you're doing it.
the policy.
Please don't change it, and yeah,
Right.
next year y'all do whatever you want.
No, you've done it right.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I-
fine.
how you're doing it.
I just,
Which is letting them speak or pulling the items.
I
Let
think
them
she's
speak.
right to say, we're going to adopt the consent agenda,
except for the items pulled,
no.
no? What did
No,
y'all
Well,
say?
when it's
Now
pulled,
you
it's no
got me
longer on
confused.
consent.
There have been one or two instances that I can recall that somebody has gone up there and said, well, you guys already adopted the consent agenda, so I might as well not say anything.
Right.
That's what I think you're trying to
Right.
say.
To avoid.
And I think what we can do is allow at public comment, you know, everybody who wants to speak. But if you have several cards on one item, let's say 4 people are gonna speak during public comment on an item that nobody had pulled, maybe at your discretion, pull that to discussion because you've got more than one card on it.
Well, see,
And it
this
seems to be an issue.
are 4 different items,
I
and
don't
they
know.
were voting on them carte blanche all at one time, and I don't
Yeah.
want that.
But that
Well,
could be a
to-
problem to the one who, because.
See, until we got on this computer,
Yeah.
everything was fine. We just moved them to discussion, and
Yeah.
that was the end of it. The first, and then,
It's tricky
you know,
now.
items B3,
Yeah.
C3, 6, and
Okay.
they were moved to discussion, and there was no problem. This computer, it's making it hard for Ms. Bush to do that, but that's the way I am used to
Let
doing
me
it.
ask you a question.
And I kinda like it that way,
And you're
because I
using
feel
that
like
agenda summary that we've already typed
when
up,
we
so
move it to
when
discussion,
they pull
that
one,
item has our
then we've
undivided
gotta figure
attention.
out
The
where
person's
Where to
it's
put it.
and write
And
it
then we're
in so you
thinking about
don't
what that
overlook
person
it.
said when
Yeah.
we then have our own
But
We'll
if we
talk
discussion.
get-
more about this.
But if we get a speaker card on it, we don't always
We
move it to
don't.
discussion.
We don't.
And my question for us is,
Do you really want to?
Yeah.
There are times when you're taking up time of the public and the board that it really, because that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Because that is where you could allow the public to control your agenda. They
Right.
could want to move everything to consent, or move everything
Or-
to discussion.
And then that
That's
person's now waiting to the end of our meeting who might wanna just speak at the beginning, like you said.
No, I
I've just
think you
been,
let
thank
them
you for
speak to
looking
their
at this.
consent agenda item just like they speak to their discussion. Before we adopt it, they get their 2 cents worth. And if at that point a board member feels like this
Yeah.
needs to be moved to discussion,
Right.
the board
Then,
member can do
yes.
that.
That's what
Yes.
you
But
have
you don't-
done. Your practice has been, okay, we have the adoption of the consent agenda, but before I take a motion on this, I have cards
Right.
on
That's
these
it,
items.
right.
We've then listened to those.
Right.
What we've
Yeah.
never done is
Right.
then
We've not
moved
pulled
any
them.
of that.
No.
But we've never felt the
Yeah.
need to. If
Correct.
we feel the need to, we
Yeah.
can do
Here's the
it.
good news.
And I
So
think that
then-
works just fine.
So then, the motion then, after, say, 4 people spoke on 4 different items. So then it comes back. So the motion then properly would be to move the consent item, and if nobody pulled an item, all those things that had been talked about would just be included in consent.
Right.
But if they say, except for, I would move to approve the consent agenda,
With the exception of.
with the exception of item D, or
Sure.
C3.
Right.
And then
Discussion.
Karen, that gives her time to move
Yeah.
it down to discussion. Okay.
So,
Okay.
the language of
All
the
right.
public comment, subsection 9,
Whatever
gives you
wording
those
we can get in
options.
to do
Okay.
that.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
And we say a time limit of 3 minutes will be imposed on each public comment speaker unless the time is extended by the presiding officer.
Now, what about items that are not on the on the agenda? Is that gonna be up to whoever's presiding?
Time
Public
limit,
comment,
we're just
right.
saying a time limit's gonna be imposed. on
Okay,
public
but then
comment
when exactly, it's just kinda like,
The
let the
discretion of the
chairman,
chair.
yeah,
Right.
Yep.
that
Now,
makes
do you think it's
sense.
necessary to have this stuff that you added in, the superintendent, and actually you have crossed out members of, so the superintendent and school board members may ask questions of and request further explanation from.
Oh, why would you take out members
Speaker.
of the school board?
The
It's
time,
it's
it's
school
on the
board
other side
members.
of it, yeah.
Yeah.
The time used by superintendent and school board members for questions and explanations shall not be counted against.
I
That
personally,
was actually
I want
borrowed
that in
from
there.
other,
Yeah.
Yeah, why did you
Sections.
cross out members of the school?
Because I was asking questions
It's
of a
beh-
member of the
it's
public
behind
at
it.
one of our
Yeah.
meetings and I got cut off.
Yeah, but you were in the public hearing, that was the difference.
No, I think I could still ask questions.
Oh, you certainly,
It's at the end of that sentence. It's
Okay.
just, he just moved the word
may
members.
ask
See
questions.
where members? Is-
All
he
I'm
just
saying
flipped
here is
where
that
it
it's
is.
not gonna be deducted.
Right, from
From
the
their time.
speaker.
Correct.
See, he just moved members to he moved members to members.
'Cause there,
Okay.
and there, I can think of other
Okay.
instances where
Okay.
we've had
There have
somebody
been
bring up
times,
an
yeah.
issue that we weren't aware of and you wanna know a little bit more that they
Yeah,
didn't cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know
We've
I've
asked-
asked.
Yeah,
we've
you've
asked
asked.
Absolutely.
questions.
oh,
Sure.
yeah, for
Before we
sure.
moved on.
So I
I
think
don't
that
think the
we
board
need
is gonna
that.
restrict
But I
it
just
on
didn't
that.
know if it was like, is it,
I
we
think
did
we
it
need
without
it.
it having to be there, so it didn't.
So
Well,
just
but
so you
not
all know-
always,
Yeah.
because, you know, if you disagree with the person, then, you know what I'm saying? There've been times where there's a little bit of bias there. So if there's a policy you can fall back on and say, no, as a board member, I can ask questions. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
that way it's, we're all on the honor system.
I don't think
or
anyone's
not on
ever
the
been
honor system.
denied, I can't remember someone not letting a board member speak. If there was, I'd have to go back and review.
Just so you know, I did take a little poll with my colleagues, and I thought it was interesting to let you know. Public hearing. Remember, let's think about public hearing versus regular comment on an agenda item. But everyone puts a 3-minute limit. Lee, Pasco, Hernando, Pope, Miami-Dade, Pinellas, Alachua.
We need
The
to do.
Where are you on
Miami-Dade,
public
Pinellas, and
hearing? Where are you on
Alachua.
public hearings? Is
Well,
that
I'm
in
just,
here?
because we
This
just
is,
talked
this
about
is his
it,
bag.
just to
Okay.
kind of give you an idea.
Excuse me, go ahead.
I liked what Miami, Pinellas, and Alachua are doing. Like I was saying, Alachua's changing theirs a little bit. If you're gonna go over 3 minutes, public speaker, even in a public hearing, right? If you're gonna go over 3 minutes, we're gonna cut you off at 3.
Yeah.
And anything else that you wanted to tell us, put it in writing and give it to the clerk,
Yeah.
to the school board clerk. I like that.
And we
Just to
didn't enforce
think
that
about
on our last public hearing, the one on the adoption of the science textbooks. Some of those people went on and on. The first man who was, is he the one who gave us that notebook that was, and actually, any handout's supposed to go through Miss Bush with 14 days' notice. And then he had a PowerPoint up there, which was totally, you know, we didn't allow that of others without 14-day notice.
That,
Yet,
I think,
here at a
I
public hearing,
think
that was
she,
wrong.
Ms. Gilhousen asked me if she could do a PowerPoint. She did that.
Yeah, he asked me, so I went to Carol. We would arrange that
Yeah.
before the
And
board meeting.
as written now, you're gonna have that discretion. Okay, the board chair is gonna have that discretion, but we're putting, no matter what you're speaking on,
Shouldn't
can
that be
impose a
limited to
3 minute.
3 minutes? I mean, his
That's
PowerPoint
what
was
we're
longer
saying.
than 3 minutes. His whole thing was probably, he was probably a good 10 to 12 minutes,
I
and
didn't
then
think we limit,
with the
no,
questions,
she
she got into
limited it.
even longer.
If you go back and watch it,
Yes.
She limited it to 3 minutes, cause she
Not
said.
until
I was
after
try-
that
didn't you
second
have the
person went.
the,
No,
First-
go back and
with
watch
the
it.
lights
first
on,
two.
on the public hearing?
Go back and watch it. What he went over was when I was asking questions, and that
always
doesn't
know
count against him.
Right, no, he had 3
He
minutes.
has 3 minutes to make his presentation.
Yeah, on public,
Because she
Mr.
was,
Da-
she said.
Ooh,
Yes.
ladies and gentlemen,
Read
I
it.
mean, ladies and gentlemen, are we supposed to use, Ms. Bush isn't clear on this, and I'm not either, was the 3 minute,
Timer.
lights,
We
on on public hearing speakers as well as
They were
our
on,
other?
Yes, we can
They were
impose
on.
it, we can
Okay.
impose it on,
And they were
all
on at
speakers.
that, yep.
Yeah,
at
but
that
boy,
Yeah.
that was
And
abused,
some-
it must
some
not
of
have been
these-
on.
Can I ask that, can I ask
Yeah.
that, why we, so we do address in here on, public comment, why are we not addressing, or why, it just could be a simple statement that says this also applies for public hearing.
You could, I think that kind of complicates things a little bit.
Why?
Do we have a separate section
Because I
on
think you can
public
just
hearing?
do, here's what we're doing for speakers.
Okay,
Right. 3 minutes, and it can be extended at the discretion of the board chair.
okay.
That's it. And that's what other school districts are doing.
So it doesn't
when
have
an
to be in
item-
policy.
Yeah,
It
but when
does
an
not have to
item
be.
comes up on the agenda, like when the
Mr. Lawrence, is that who you're talking about?
evolution came up,
Yeah.
Right.
okay. When that item is before the board, at that point, that's, in my opinion, the time that when she wanted him, she was asking questions, and that, to me, that is the time to do that.
Yeah.
Not during the public hearing. The public hearing, they get up and speak for 3 minutes, and they sit down. But when the item comes to the board, the discussion item, if Ms. Gilhousen wants to spend an hour, asking questions and getting answers, that is her right.
So she could say, there was a speaker
Like him
during
to
the
come
public
back.
hearing that I'd like to ask questions of.
All
But
she
what
would
if
say
they-
is, I have some
but what if they
further
leave?
questions of Mr., what was his name, Lawrence?
Lawrence, but what if
She's-
they leave
Well,
before?
then you say something.
Well, he won't.
But you
Not
can
on an
make a
item like that.
comment at that point and say, Mr. Lawrence, I will have questions for you when this comes up for
Right.
discussion.
I
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And you can
I
say
mean,
that.
because the public
And you
hearing,
did.
we
And then
had
he should come
a
back to the
stack
podium
of
and answer
cards.
questions at
That
that
wasn't the
time.
time, and
And
I
that's
didn't,
respectful of all those other people's
And I,
time.
and I, and I,
Yeah, I
and,
get that.
these people have sat there through all the stuff, and so, in my opinion, a public hearing is just that. They get up, they speak 3 minutes, but then when that, and I think I stated that night at the meeting,
did.
when that item comes before the
Right.
board, you will have ample time to discuss, and in fact, I think at the end, I even
You did
said, do
ask
you have
me,
any
yeah.
other
You
questions?
did, yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
want to give, because that, I mean, that's your right as a school board member to have someone up, and there's no time limit on that.
Right.
And so I wasn't trying to be rude, but I'm glad that
No, I
we've
thought
talked
so.
about it, because now y'all understand, public hearing is not the time to go into the back and forth discourse with these people, or we could be sitting there all
No,
night.
and I didn't take it
Do
as
we
you
need to
were rude,
address
but
that
I
in our
did,
I was
I do
trying-
recall
Anywhere
I
now.
wanna make
public
sure
hearings
we
are
I didn't
addressed
think you
in
were
our
rude.
policy.
I didn't understand.
Okay.
That was the problem.
We're
Well, now
keeping
we've
it simple.
seen,
Yeah.
And-
we're
and for
working
me,
through
3
it.
minutes.
When I
That's
was
it.
listening
Public
to him,
speakers.
I'm coming up
And
with
then
at the
questions, and
discretion
I'm
of the
afraid that
board
once you
chair
go sit
can
down, and that's
extend.
what happened.
And
Once
he's
you
not
sat
gonna
down,
leave.
I
Hey,
forgot
none
what
of
I
those
wanted to
people were
ask
gonna
him.
leave.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, cause you said, yeah.
So that was the problem.
Well, I'm glad we
Anyway,
got
but
that
I'll-
worked out,
I'll
so there's no
handle it next time.
misunderstanding. That's where I was coming from, is trying to keep the meeting going, and because I knew when that item came up, there was gonna be a whole lot of discussion on it, and and we'll sit there as long as it takes to get everybody's questions and concerns answered. And so I never would openly try to be rude to anybody, and I don't.
Hey, let me
But you
ask
know
a
what?
question on that.
The way this is worded, if we're not specifically addressing public hearing, and we're talking about, the questions, you could interpret that falls for a public hearing also.
Yes, you
Yeah,
could.
and let me ask a
Yeah.
question
You could.
on that. In
Which
that
is
vein,
fine.
Well,
We
no,
have-
No, it's
we need,
not.
no, we don't, because, there'll be many, many more chairmen after this, and I think that maybe it needs to be clarified so that this doesn't come up again.
well, I was gonna ask in that same light.
Yeah.
Our practice has been that people haven't had to fill out a card during our public hearing.
They don't have to fill out a
Nobody
card on
does.
public hearing, but Ms. Bush said to me, if they would fill out a card, it sure makes my life easier,
Right.
because she needs the name
I'm
and
putting
information
their
for the
names in the
record.
minutes.
And so
Right.
we had them fill out cards. She said, do you
Yes.
mind? And I said, no,
But
because they'll get up there and say,
Well, if I'm hearing
You
Mr.
know, you
Daggett
don't know
right,
what
it's
they
perfectly
said.
okay if we
Has to be
require
good,
that they
yeah.
do.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
So I don't think we have to say that
Any-
you don't have to fill out a card.
right.
we didn't.
No, I know, but for
mean-
going
Yeah.
forward, for all public hearings, I think it's perfectly
Yeah.
okay for
Any
the only
speaker
people to
should
speak.
fill it out. I think we probably need to address something about public hearing though, just so that we keep it as
Consistent.
everybody given the 3 minutes, having 3 minutes, and it's not a discussion time for us, because it then comes back to the board where we have discussions. So the way this is worded is great as far as normal public comment, but for the public hearing, I think if we just lump it in there, it gives the impression that we're going to engage in discussion during the public hearing, and
Now,
we're not.
Now, Ms. Bush, you said the cards helped you as far as trying to identify.
So you
We
might
had
wanna
so
have just
many,
one
and you know,
special,
some of them will
put
get
an
up to the
A
mic and
in
say,
it.
Well, I don't know.
Right.
Public hearing.
You don't have a
Am I
clue.
required to list their
I'm-
names? I mean, I could say
Citizens
there
are.
were
No, I mean,
10
you need-
Citizens have the
speakers.
opportunity.
No,
I think you
Three
can do
minutes
it that
I
way. You
think-
can say
filling
10
out a
for,
card
10 against.
during-
or
I
something.
prefer the names to be
Uh,
listed,
addressing
because
the
sometimes, you know,
item
like if you
during
go
the
back
public hearing, because
8 years
there are some
ago,
Right.
people
to-
that
or
don't
10
talk
years
about
ago to look
right.
at something, you might say,
Well, aren't we
that
doing
person
that when we're
spoke
saying
then, you know, and then you
And I
might
don't
wanna
wanna
look back and
just
see what they
Member of the
Yes.
said.
public who
Spell
wishes
their
comments.
names.
Correct.
or speak
Yeah,
about
we'll
a
take
matter
a-
on the agenda.
Take a guess.
Yes.
Public hearing is gonna be a matter on the
You
agenda.
you are covering all that, but then you have that last sentence that you added, which says that school board members and superintendent may ask questions, and we're not asking questions during a public hearing.
Right.
That's where I said it's confusing. So
Yeah.
either we need to have
We don't want a bunch of
separate
questions in the
little
public hearing.
sentence on public hearings that yes, you know, and the public hearing is questions only on that item.
So let me ask you that. So, on what he has said, so it's almost, they're almost three separate, not just the public hearing and the public comment, but there's almost three separate. I'm,
And then workshops where they can only ask questions.
well,
you know.
because here where we're saying the superintendent and school board members may ask questions of and request further explanation from the speaker.
Mhm.
We don't do that. In fact, we've done quite the opposite. Our practice has been, we
Not
don't
to say
address
Right.
the public when they're talking.
Kind of an unwritten rule
And
has
this,
been,
poor Mr. Davis, he's wanted to.
Right.
And but it does get disruptive to the whole process. I see the value in both.
But there
And
have
there-
been times where, like you or I have leaned forward and said, I'd like to ask a question of
Could I
them.
ask a question?
And ask the one question, so, you know, we
and I
didn't
think
take
that's
any time
important
from
that you
them.
have the,
Do we
ability
wanna
to do
put it
that.
in policy?
That's what I was wondering, because we're already doing it.
I'm thinking we should take that last sentence out.
Mhm. And if we take that sentence out, then this is fine,
Yeah,
it
you can
covers,
take it out.
it covers public hearings.
Less is more.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you're saying
So
just take out that whole underlined red,
yeah, and that
Yeah,
it
I
shall
like
not
that.
be counted or
Remove
that
whatever.
addresses it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then by removing that, it covers
By not
the
saying that we
3 minute
can
and the
ask-
card.
so we're
Public
not
hearing.
saying that we can ask questions, but we're not saying we can ask
Right,
questions.
right.
That's
We're
right.
just gonna
Right.
continue
And
how
I
we're doing
think-
it.
What do you think?
And
And I
our
think-
unwritten
I
rule
like
is
that
if you do
sentence,
ask
but
questions,
majority
we'll
rules.
pause the timer.
Right.
Yes.
Huh?
Right.
The timer on public hearings?
I said
It
our
gets-
unwritten rule will be if you do ask questions, we will pause the timer.
Mm-hmm.
And y'all do want all
Right.
speakers during public hearings time for 3 minutes.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't, because
Just kinda-
we've not been
Right.
clear.
Right.
And I think Betsy's idea of the of filling out the card regardless of a public hearing or a regular special or workshop.
I think that helps
Is-
it to keep better
Yeah, it
records.
Yeah, definitely.
It does.
But to your point, and I get it, I agree with you, I think that's a respect thing, you know, and we're about to be certified as a master board, and I think that in the event that another board member tries to cut off a board member asking questions at the appropriate time,
Right.
that's a conversation that we have professionally, to
Right.
just say,
Right.
you know, can
So
I-
you're saying just could completely cross that whole,
I like
Yes,
that.
That add-on, just remove that, yeah.
I think it may open up a box that you really don't wanna get
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
And you already have stated in the very beginning of this whole section, at 102A4, that individual school board members are entitled to full information and data necessary in his or her judgment for the proper casting of the vote. So that's embedded.
Right.
You each have a right as a member of the
Right.
collegial body to
Right.
do that.
Because you could say, without having my questions answered by this speaker, I don't feel like I have the information to make the
Right.
vote. The
Right.
reason I think that it should come out is sometimes someone brings up something or says something inflammatory and it might, and it's always best to have a pause before we react. So sometimes it's better to wait and ask the questions later and kind of.
Have time to let it settle.
I've
I'm
been
not
sitting there
thinking
through that.
Yeah.
No, I'm actually thinking of Mr. Davis. When somebody has said something that has bothered him, but he lets the person finish talking, but then you have said, do you need to address it? And then he just kind of has
Yeah.
let it go or whatever, or he addresses it during his comments.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
He waits.
All right, so, here,
Whatever, so the majority says, just to
Strike it.
cross that out,
Are you
okay.
comfortable?
Yes.
Does that make you comfortable that it's
Yeah.
addressed in other
Yeah.
places?
Oh boy, now comes,
and now we're striking the entirety
Quiet.
of the scheduled citizen
So-
request.
You know,
So-
we may not wanna get into this because, Miss Bush, did you say we need to end by 11:25?
Yes.
I thought it
Okay,
started at
but all we're
noon.
doing is striking. I'd
It
love
starts
to be
at
able to
noon.
get
Seats,
through
and
it.
she said, to
Are we
get there in
striking?
time.
Trust me.
Well,
Yeah, that was a great idea.
the schedules trust you what?
Nothing. I was suggesting 11:25.
So we're
Okay.
striking
All
9
right.
and move right on to 10.
All right, Janet, excuse me just a minute.
Sorry, Carol.
On scheduled citizens request, that's going to require some conversation from this board, and I don't think at 20 after 11 that we're going to get in there. So I think what I'm reading here is that you're completely canceling all 10-minute speakers. Is
No,
that
Well, that was the,
Actually, technically, not.
Tell
Because
me
it
how.
says, at the discretion of the presiding officers.
where are you?
Officer, well, this last one that we just did for public comment.
Okay,
That
can-
you could, members of the public may speak, and as the presiding officer, if you feel that a citizen requires more time than the 3 minutes based on what they are bringing to the board, it's my understanding that she could say this particular presentation is going to be a 10-minute presentation.
No other, so
There-
here's the
there is
only
that
thing I'll say.
yeah.
I'm
No
throwing
other-
that out. as a-
We're gonna talk for 5
Gotcha.
minutes on this,
So no other governing body has anything like this.
like a
Not
10-minute
one.
speaker.
Nothing.
Not one.
And in years
some of
past,
them-
this has come up,
Yeah.
as things evolve, and former boards were very reluctant to remove this for fear that they would not be successful in future campaigns. Is that how delicately I can put that? That they felt that it would be, but
Well, but Carol, I see it
I
as,
think that from what I am, excuse me just a minute, you could chance. From what you have said, we are one of, I don't know of any other board that allows 10-minute speakers.
No.
I don't, and I was interested to hear what y'all think about this, but, I mean, you can have a limit like 5 minutes, or you can do something like whoever is chairman can extend it. I mean, I just want to hear what y'all have to say about it now. Ms.
to me, it's
Gilhousen.
fairness. I mean, if you're gonna let one member of the public speak for 10 and everybody else only gets 3, that's
Well,
not fair.
Well, but they've gone through,
I
getting
get
their
that, but there's a
backups 2
process.
weeks before and all this, but I can't tell you the times that I get called a week before and they say, I really want to speak about whatever, and I have to say, or Karen does if they call Ms. Bush, say, well, you did not meet the 2-week
Right.
deadline, and a lot of them don't think about it until a few days before
So
the
what
meeting.
if we added a sentence in the public comment, so to Ms. Bola's point, so if you take that sentence and add language in that Mr. Daggett read us that Alachua has in theirs,
Right.
what
or
did-
whoever you said,
And how
you
was
said if it was beyond the time frame,
3 minutes.
the 3 minutes, you submit it in writing to the board.
Right.
There you
Then
go.
all of us can get these presentations of things that the public wants us to hear, and we have time to read it, we can contact them with our questions, and then if an item needs to come for action out of that, we then as a board member can bring it to the agenda.
Right.
But that way, we're
we are being fair to everyone. We're gonna listen to you for 3
So
minutes.
you're saying it would just be a written comment rather than coming to the board and
Yeah.
They
commenting?
could still give their
They
presentation.
could send their backup
Right.
to us so
Yeah.
we can
And you
review
could,
it.
they could bring a PowerPoint
Right.
with them and give it to you but it
Right.
would just be a 3-minute PowerPoint.
3 minutes, yep.
So I think that's just a way to treat everybody fairly. Instead of putting these time restrictions and then you only get one per meeting. That way, if
No,
whoever wants to
that's-
submit
yeah.
it can.
And I think this is the appropriate time for us to address this, because we don't have anything right now that we know is real
That's
controversial.
right.
Because I know with Prayer at the Flagpole, y'all had
Oh, dear Lord.
18,
Oh, yeah.
however many 10-minute speakers, you were here for hours and hours.
Redistricting Fleming Island High School.
Yeah.
So though, we don't, right now, we don't have any controversial issues before the board that we would have people that would want these
Right.
long. So it's the appropriate time. We're not taking a side on any side of any issue. We're just saying, out of respect for time, because our meetings
Are
do get
getting
long.
Now, how is Alachua worded, Mr.
They
Daggett?
don't have theirs set yet, but here's language I think I'm getting.
Okay,
After you say a time limit of 3 minutes will be imposed on each public comment speaker unless the time is extended by the presiding officer.
okay.
The board will accept written comments beyond the time allotted.
Written comments, and I would even say presentations.
Yeah.
So that if
Written
they have
comments.
PowerPoint slides
Wait,
that they wanna
beyond
give
the
us, that's
time
fine.
allotted.
So
The
beyond the 3
Speaker,
minutes,
you cut the speaker off for 3 minutes, the speaker says, I have more to tell you.
submit it in writing.
Email
Please,
us.
you can submit it in writing.
But what about what she was talking about,
Submit
if
it
someone
prior.
wanted to submit it prior to the meeting?
Oh, that
You-
wasn't what I
that is
meant.
Oh,
So
what
what
did you
I
mean?
meant was that.
I heard
But
you
they
wrong
can do
then.
that too.
So what I was meaning was, okay, you know, the people that we see that they've clearly not practiced it. So they have
Yes.
their long thing written.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they've written it all out, and it goes, and they say the 3 minutes, and you're tapping the gavel,
Oh,
you're
and I'm trying to be
nice.
polite, yet,
And it's
did
still
you tap
not.
a little harder?
Then, at that point, they could take whatever portion they wanted to and submit it. Or they could just submit something, a presentation, backup or whatever. Then, if one of the 5 of us reads through that in our own time as we're preparing for the next meeting and feels like, wait a minute, I think the board should discuss this. I'd like to see this on an agenda. Then we agenda the item.
But what if it's something that was on that agenda that we already voted on?
That's what I was just.
So but then they're wanting more time than anyone else, and that's not fair. In our
Right.
current
So
policy, they could get more time.
Is there a way we could write it in our policy so they send that information prior to the meeting so that we see their PowerPoint and,
They're not gonna do
you
that.
know?
I'm going to, for the
Probably not.
purposes of today, to
Uh-huh.
tie this one up in a bow, I'm gonna put the board will accept written comments beyond the time allotted. And we can think of, remember, you don't
Okay.
have to put it in
Let's,
policy.
We have homework.
Let's make a note,
procedure.
this is where we ended.
But y'all,
Yep.
look,
Yeah, we didn't get very far.
Yeah, we did.
oh, I thought I was gonna
I
brag
was
on
thinking
us.
we'd get into 1.03 at least.
No, well, listen, you get to the electronic, that's not gonna be a biggie.
We're doing good.
I think we're doing great.
Well, we're
I'm gonna
doing
pat us
the
on the
right
back.
We're
We're doing
doing
it
it.
correctly.
Yes.
And it may take longer, but we'll be
Yeah.
proud of it. So we're gonna start we're gonna try to finish up this right here.
The scheduled citizens
All right.
request, is that what you're putting it as? Okay,
Okay.
so I got it.
All right, now, do y'all want to set a date for this before we leave? Or do you want to wait until, what have we got next?
Our next
Our
one.
next workshop.
Let's see.
Workshop is
review.
next week
And master
with
board.
master board and then the school
Wait.
board meeting the following.
Let's see, we've got, let's see, agenda review is on the 27th, is that correct?
About April
Well,
15th.
how about at that one, that we'll have a chance to look at our calendar and look at that, and at the agenda review, don't let me forget, and we'll set a date for the next
Okay.
policy. And that'll give us,
Sounds good.
that way, we can
So
all,
we're not setting the date today.
yeah, we'll wait and do it at the agenda review next week.
I've
And-
got an emergency phone call I'm gonna have
Oh,
to.
okay, go. We are, the meeting is adjourned.